sharing, and I will call to order the meeting of the Board of Selectmen for Tuesday, April 6th. And let me do a screen share. We will do the Pledge of Allegiance. So, all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. And the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for the March 22nd, 2021 meeting. Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, great. Any discussion, changes, amendments? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. I'm assuming that was Bruce as well. All right, great. So the next item on our agenda is I would like to welcome our legislative delegation to Hartford, Senator Christine Cohen and State Representative John Michael Parker. So wanted to welcome you here to our meeting this morning. Clearly you guys have been very busy. So I think we'd all appreciate a little update about how things are moving along in Hartford and maybe talk about the timeline and some of the pending legislation. So that would be appreciated. So I will turn it over to Christine and John Michael.
Michael, you wanna start? Good morning, everybody.
Nice to see you, Christine. Yeah, sure, I can get started. Thank you all for having us. Happy to be back at another meeting and to get to share some updates and maybe have a little bit of a conversation. So Christine and I connected over the last few days, and we thought that the framework for how we wanted to share today would first be to just put on your radar a few things that have already passed through the House and Senate. So some of the big ticket items that we've already been working on as a full legislature. Then we wanted to talk about a few of the things that we're each working on sort of individually, or things that we're focusing on that we think might be of interest to you all and anyone that's watching. And then we wanted to just touch on a few of the upcoming issues that might be of concern, that might be of interest, and have some conversation there. So I'm going to get started sort of running through all of that, and then I'll hand it to Christine, and then we'll be happy to take some questions from the board. So first of all, in terms of just a few things that have happened and already passed through the House and Senate, a few big bills that might be of interest to our community. First of all, we passed HB 6672, which was an act concerning public health and civil preparedness emergencies declared and renewed by the governor. So this was basically continuing out the structure of executive orders from April 20th out into May. I talked with Peggy about this ahead of time, learned just how many town processes are depending on that sort of big group of executive orders. Also the availability of relief funds being dependent on that emergency declaration. And the other thing that we made sure to go with this was HB 6555, which is an act concerning legislative oversight and approval of COVID-19 relief funds. So it was really important to both the House and the Senate to make sure that if we were extending the period, that didn't mean that the governor could just go and spend all of the COVID-19 money, that still would have to go through the legislative process. So we thought that was a pretty good deal to put in place and are happy to be moving forward there. We also passed HB 6462, which is an act concerning use of force by a peace officer. So this goes back to the police accountability conversation that has been with us for a while, but it was especially sort of front and center in the last year or so. And this looked at one of the major issues about improving that act that folks had talked about, which is extending the timeline around the use of force and making sure that that could be implemented in a reasonable way. As a note, and I'm sure you all know this, Chief Jack Drum has been really involved in this process statewide, which has been great and a good resource for us. So that was a great bipartisan issue that we were happy to work on, to say, let's continue to look at this and try to roll it out in the right way. And the last one that I'll mention in terms of what's gone through the whole House and Senate, HB 6513, which had a few pieces to it. It was about not double taxing. I won't read the whole name because it's really long. It was about not double taxing folks that work here and telecommute between New York. So they were getting double taxation. So we got that dealt with. And then it was also about a poverty tax program. And then also it was about payments in lieu of taxes, so a pilot program that was sort of looking at maintaining funding for towns like Madison, which is sort of the most important piece to us, but then also thinking about equity in a broader picture. So it was, again, a compromise that seemed to make sense for where we are and where we want to get to. So anyways, I mentioned those three as the process has worked. In the beginning of the session, we're in our committees and doing work with small groups as we get them through these topic areas. And then after that, we start voting on things in the full House and Senate. That's going to happen more and more as we continue to get into May and June. We've only been to Hartford, I think, a handful of times. I think for me, it's been 4 times. And a lot of it has been just working on committee issues here at home in front of my Zoom camera. So the second piece then that I want to talk a little bit, and I'll, again, run through this quickly, but just a few updates of stuff that I've been working on personally sort of here in the district, which I think is exciting. First of all, I helped start a group called the Future Caucus, which is a group of bipartisan young legislators that are looking to find solutions to the biggest problems facing future generations. So we've got dozens of people from across the aisle that are working on that, which is exciting. In the last few weeks, Christine and I teamed up with Sean Scanlon to host a mental health roundtable here in Madison and Guilford, which featured providers, educators, youth and family services folks, and had some really, I think, exciting conversations. Followed that up with a combo with young people, peer advocates, and there's a lot more steps we're taking out of that. Christine and I have also been working with Peggy and Dave and a few other folks here on a bonding request to try to get some funding for Garvin Point, which is a project that I know you folks got to look at when we updated the budget for that a few weeks ago. So we're excited about that. And then on my radar coming up, a few meetings that I'll be hosting for different parts of the community. So we'll have a meeting with the SBA, Small Business Administration, for small business conversations. So that's going to be hosted with the chamber. So we're connecting with them. That'll be on April 22nd at 5 p.m. All this, will be available on my website and emails and all that. So we're going to focus on PPP loans and other economic disaster support for small businesses. We're also having a meeting on probably May 6th. We're looking at with the Connecticut Fair Housing Center to look at the 10 to 15% of folks in our community that are renting and what supports are available to them during this time. And Christine and I are also coming together for a meeting with the Senior Center on Tuesday, May 18th at 1:30 p.m. Again, a virtual meeting. We've connected with Austin and Heather over there, and we're going to discuss some of the issues that might affect our senior community. So we're trying to do those kind of events all throughout. Anyways, I'm going to say one last piece, and then I'll hand it over to Christine. When I look ahead about some of the big issues that I know are sort of coming at us on the horizon, there's been a lot of conversation, I know, about zoning, sort of how that connects to housing as well. And we'll be happy to get into a bit more of a conversation if helpful. But what I just wanted to share initially is that sort of first going back to the process, a lot of bills get introduced every session that have a lot of pieces to them, and then the committees sort of whittle them down and figure out what they actually want to move forward. So when we look at what came out of committee last Wednesday on the Planning and Development Committee, which neither Christine nor I sit on, so we haven't taken any of those votes. I actually think some of the proposals have gotten much more reasonable, taken out some pieces about as of right zoning and development, which I know is problematic. And while there's still some work to go on a few of these, and there's 4 or 5 bills that, again, I'm happy to have individual conversations because I don't want to take up your time reading through, 7 bill descriptions. I think there's actually some good ideas in there, some things that still need to be worked on, and there's still a ways to go before any of these bills might hit the House or the Senate floor where we could actually vote on them. Ultimately, just to share my piece, I certainly believe in protecting autonomy here for folks in town and putting trust in our town leaders, volunteers, folks that are elected, people that step up to serve. It's a balance between what authority is given to municipalities by the state government. The state is involved in everything, all aspects of our town, and we have to find in these specific issues how that best interplay works. I know zoning is a tricky issue that we're all thinking a lot about this year, and I certainly think we can strike that balance in a way that protects our environment and thinking about conservation and not overdevelopment, that helps us move towards more accessibility and equity and affordability in our community, which is, I think, something that we all share that we want to do. And also that sort of continues to give our town the authority to make decisions that are best for us here in Madison. So again, happy to get into the nitty gritty of those number of bills, whether it makes sense in this meeting or offline with anybody. And with that, I'm going to hand it to my colleague, Senator Cohen.
Thanks, John Michael. And again, good morning, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you. Bright and early, you guys get going. So John Michael's covered a lot of what's going on. Certainly it is a busy session. The pandemic has not slowed the legislature down by any means. You would think all is normal and well based on the book of business that's coming out. Already the Senate and House calendars are filled with legislation that has passed out of committee, and more is to come. Not every committee has met its joint favorable deadline yet. I had mine, as you know, I'm the Senate chair of the Environment Committee. We just had our JF deadline. It was actually yesterday, but we finished our business last week. So just briefly, I'll give you an update of what's sort of going on in my world. And we know we're doing really well in terms of trying to get people vaccinated. So I just want to say that from a state standpoint, give a little coronavirus update. We've had over 2 million doses administered, which is just fantastic. I know the governor had Scott Gottlieb on his press conference, who's the former FDA administrator under Donald Trump. And he was saying that we've just done a fantastic job in terms of having this age-based rollout. It's really proven to be incredibly effective. It keeps us in the top 5 in terms of the percentage of population vaccinated. We have had a little bit of trouble with recent strains of the virus and more contagious strains. And so we've watched our positivity rate creep up a little bit. Over the past weekend, it was 3.28%. So we're getting back into, starting to see it climb down. So hopefully that will continue. We'll see it downward trend on the positivity rate, and we'll continue to have good news as more and more folks are able to get vaccinated. I know that can be incredibly frustrating for people making appointments right now. This last phase sort of opened up the gates, and what I will say is that we're continuing to get doses in. I think we're expecting close to 300,000 doses this week alone. And there will continue to be clinics available for the residents of Madison and the state of Connecticut. Other exciting news certainly is in terms of federal dollars. We stand to get a substantial amount, in the state of Connecticut. As John Michael said, we voted that the legislature would have some say in how those dollars are spent together with the governor and OPM. It'll be used for capital projects, education, municipal aid, and we know that Madison will be in there in the mix. Other good financial news is that Moody's did upgrade us for the first time in 20 years. A lot of that has to do with our projected surplus of $245 million. We obviously have a substantial rainy day fund at $3.7 billion. So really good news for the state of Connecticut there, obviously allowing us to borrow money at a much lower rate. In terms of the governor's budget, just as John Michael said, in terms of legislation, we know that, proposals have a long path ahead of them. The first step is getting them out of committee, which is a big hurdle, but then, obviously having to make it through both chambers. This is no different for the budget. The governor sort of presents us with his ideas on what the budget should look like, and then, the legislature, together with the committees of finance and appropriations, determine, different passes of the budget. There will be several iterations of that as well. What we know in the governor's budget is that ECS is level funded. The governor's budget did not account for federal pandemic funding, so that's good news. He was able to present a balanced budget without taking those dollars into account. There aren't any income tax changes, no gift in estate tax changes. What I will say, what is near and dear to my heart in the governor's budget is, and certainly for Madison, our municipal incentives around resiliency. I talk a lot about coastal resiliency. We certainly focus on that in Madison. We saw the disastrous effects of Sandy and what these superstorms really, how they wreak havoc on communities, and we have to account for sea level rise. So, this portion of the budget, which is HB 6441, provides for options for towns to create funding sources, funding mechanisms to provide for resiliency planning and funding. Some of those include creating stormwater authorities or the option of creating a conveyance fee, which all of these things are optional for municipalities and would need to go through a vote of your legislative body here. So really interesting ways to come about funding, and I'm excited about it because we really need to start planning as a state for resiliency. Also, opportunities within that bill as well on municipal borrowing through the Green Bank and setting up an environmental infrastructure fund. So also great. And as you may recall, in 2019, I created legislation to create these municipal coastal resiliency funds and climate change resiliency funds. And I have another bill in this session that looks like it's going to be sort of combined with some of these things to allow for municipalities to invest those funds through the Office of the State Treasurer, just providing some relief in terms of, needing a review board and a financial planner. So that could be really good news if this is something that Madison's looking into in terms of having these coastal resiliency funds. Other work out of my committee pertaining to municipalities that is interesting is the sewage updates to the sewage right to know statute. If you recall, there was that spill out of Hamden and New Haven line that we were not notified in this timely fashion. This law would update, this proposal would update the law to require notification within 2 hours. We also have a bill on the PFAS take back. That's the firefighting foam that's often used in training. So that's really important for towns. And a big focus of my committee this year is on waste issues, where, as many of you know, it's just sort of at a breaking point in terms of hauling waste. Tipping fees have skyrocketed. We have environmental considerations, and so the Environment Committee really, on the recommendations of CCSMM, which is the group of municipal leaders that have gotten together under DEEP and is chaired by Laura Francis in Durham and Matt Knickerbocker in Bethel. There were a series of recommendations out of that group, and many of the waste management proposals came directly from those recommendations. They include, more anaerobic digestion, composting options for municipalities, updates to bottle redemption laws, options for municipalities to employ unit-based pricing measures. And then there's also extended producer responsibility bills for bill for tires, smoke detectors, and cylinders, which has been really tough for municipal transfer stations to deal with. I'm also vice chair of the Commerce Committee, and I also sit on the Finance Committee in addition to Aging and Children's. But we have a lot of exciting bills coming out of Commerce and Finance, particularly with respect to business relief on the heels of the pandemic. I had a bill proposal on relief of sales tax and use for personal protective equipment for businesses. Also a bill that ensures unemployment insurance experience ratings aren't impacted by COVID for small businesses. And we have a really interesting bill in finance right now for restaurant relief, providing a little bit more relief than they've received this point, at this juncture, from both the SBA and local state funding. So in addition to all of that, I chair the Coastal Caucus, as you know, and you just heard me talk about some of the resiliency efforts. We're going to be working hard on some of those things as we move forward. And I also am chair of the Bioscience Caucus, which we know to be a really fast-growing sector across the state, particularly in our region, and particularly in light of the pandemic. So there is just really exciting stuff happening across the board. So, but with that, I could go on and on about all that's going on. I'll turn it back over to all of you. I know you all have a robust agenda this morning as well.
No, I appreciate very much the update. It is a lot going on and it's a busy time. And I know we're going to want to have you come back and provide some updates as things kind of work their way through the system. But I certainly want to open it up to some questions from board members. So does anybody have any specific questions for Christine or John Michael?
I'll jump right in if nobody else is. First off, thank you both for coming this morning. Christine, I know you're spread pretty thin along a bunch of towns. John Michael, I think we get 50% of your time, don't we?
More like 70.
So thanks for making the time this morning. It's terrific, and I think it's terrific every time we have our representatives from Hartford in front of us, not only for us as a selectman, but for the public as well, because it's one of the few opportunities where they sort of get to see all of their local elected officials together and exchanging ideas. So to the extent that we can extend a standing invitation with some regular frequency to you folks, I would certainly support that initiative from the selectmen, and I think that would be great.
Well, as we recall, when John Michael came at the beginning of the year, we agreed on a quarterly update and here we are. We're in the next quarter. I was planning this for later in the month, but I know you wanted to have them come earlier, but the plan would be quarterly, I think, to have them visit us.
So I think that's terrific. I think, and thank you. Christine, the CRC issue is really kind of front and center for us as a Board of Selectmen right now. We've received from our CRC a draft floodplain ordinance update. And that has created a lot of public response, which is great. I mean, we have a community that's interested and is informed about it. If there's any way for the work that you're doing to inform our decision around this ordinance, it would be great to get a summary of that information so that we can incorporate it into our consideration as we move through this ongoing public input process and then move on to our deliberations. So I'll just put that out there.
Absolutely, and I'll just say that Madison is so fortunate in that you have none other than Mr. McDougald, who is able to help help the town through this process, and we use Joe frequently at the state level to help inform our legislative proposals on coastal resiliency. Just in all of his work, both at UConn and together with Circa at UConn. So it's great that you have him as a resource as well. And I'm happy to, keep you posted on what is going on, and also just hear from you about what you're hearing and seeing and think that needs to happen in order for Madison to really shore up the coastline, what that financial commitment looks like, what that commitment looks like from residents, and, where the pushback exists, both from residents as well as, actual structural pushback and what both John Michael and I can do to help, because I know this is of particular interest to Representative Parker as well.
Right. Well, there's a lot of moving parts in the conversation, and it will be quite a bit of work for us to reconcile all of those parts for something that works for the town. So I think we're up to the task, but it will be interesting.
Can I jump in and ask a question, Bruce?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so thanks both of you for joining us today. You guys mentioned, a mental health forum that you did. I'm assuming that was with Madison Youth and Family Services. Could you just touch maybe a little bit more on that and maybe some future sessions that may be happening? Just given COVID, obviously mental health is such an important conversation right now, and I think it's something that needs to be thought of more in our community. And I'm glad you guys are helping to bring a spotlight to that important topic.
Yeah, happy to share briefly on that. Thanks for the question, Scott. So, when Christine and I and Sean discussed this idea of having a roundtable, we sort of acknowledge this could be, there's so much that we can do legislatively in Hartford, passing statewide bills, but also right here in the community, there are much more specific local initiatives that we want to be able to support with. So while, I'm proud of work we did on the education committee that I sit on around social emotional learning, and in public health committee that I sit on around mental health, we thought, let's get a conversation with stakeholders here in the community and get some guidance and feedback, and maybe just see it as a way to share ideas. And if some next steps emerge, that would be great. So between Madison and Durham, we had the leaders of Youth and Family Services, so Scott Cochran here. We also had our principals of the high school and the middle schools. We had two awesome students, a high school student and a middle school student that joined us actually. And we had a couple of local providers, including someone here from Madison, Dr. Michael Garland. Sort of we shared a few opening thoughts and then really let the conversation go. And we heard a lot about the challenges that young folks are facing now, sort of uniquely in a way that sort of adds on to all that already exists. We were alarmed to know that as we move forward, and even as the community starts to reopen and people get back to school, there's going to be a lot of lingering anxiety and uncertainty about the resocialization process, and even more supports that are needed to put in place. And so out of that conversation, we, as I mentioned briefly, set up I was able to visit one of the peer advocate groups, which had about 15 high school students connected to the Valor group that talked in their own words a little more fully about some of the challenges they're facing, which was just an awesome conversation. I was a peer advocate back when I was a high school student here in Madison, 15 years ago. So it was awesome just to see the conversations we were having back in 2005 versus what these young folks are having today in 2021. The issues they're dealing with, the way they can talk about it so eloquently was really extraordinary. There's also been some exciting work going on with the Yale system and some initiatives that they're working on that actually came out of the conversation that we had. And we're bringing the conversation now to Durham and to some other communities. So I think here in Madison, we'd be happy to follow up. We've been kicking around an idea of maybe connecting with some educators and seeing if there are ideas that specifically mental health professionals can share in the context of a conversation with teachers about what to look for and to expect in the years ahead. And really, this is a never-ending issue that I know Christine and I are both passionate about. So we'll be happy to keep moving it forward. And certainly you all please reach out to us with ideas or ways that we could help locally in this conversation.
Well, and I think to just put a final cap on that point, I think we're blessed in our community to have such a wonderful youth and family services organization that touches so many people in our community. So I appreciate the focus. I think that is fantastic.
So one other thought, Peggy, if I can, unless Al or Aaron, if you have something.
No.
Well, I'm not sure if you're planning on following up, Bruce, but I did have I was hoping to get a little bit more information about the zoning legislation, because I know it's a hot topic. There's a lot of what I think must be misinformation going on. I'm the liaison to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I think having attended their meeting where they talked about it, they're trying to get their arms around it as well. So I don't know if you could kind of touch upon, I know it's not out of committee and I know you're not on those committees, but if you could sort of kind of explain to us and to any members of the public who might be here, kind of what's important for Madison? How is this going to impact Madison? What do we need to be thinking about? If you have any idea of what the timeline looks like. When does the legislative session end? Is it May this year or June? May?
It's June. That's
June.
a long session. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
So as
just so
far
that
as
we can kind of even
Go
just be able to respond to people who might be asking us about these topics. It's a lot to ask. I know. I'm asking you.
No. Well, the problem is this early in the session is, there's a lot of proposals that are flying around. I will say this has, SB 1024 has made it out of committee. So now it's really time to dig in and start talking about what made it out of committee. And, that's where it's important for us to sort of be coordinating and collaborating on, what works for Madison, maybe what doesn't work for Madison. I will say, the bill as originally presented, and some of this, you mentioned misinformation. Some of this comes from, there are proposals that go back, even a couple of years of, sort of these mandates, these zoning mandates, and that got people really upset, obviously. And then in 2020, some of that talk continued. When the bill was presented this year, it was done so very differently. So a lot of the things that people were incredibly concerned about in terms of giving up local control came out. Still, there were some things in there that were very concerning to towns. Lots of folks, I think it was a 24-hour plus hearing, public hearing. Lots of folks, including municipal leaders, came out and spoke on it. And as a result, the bill has been modified further. So what came out is actually joint favorable substitute language that really addressed some of those concerns. A lot of the opposition in the bill focused around the as of right language, and that's been removed. Some things that are important to Madison that are in there, and Dave Anderson and I have had several conversations about this. I know we've talked about this in planning and zoning as well, but those alternative treatment systems, increasing the capacity, that's in there. So that's actually a positive thing. But some of the other things that came out were the ability for aggrieved parties to bring, to have libel suits against municipalities. So that was concerning, and that was removed from the language. Also, the language around primary transit stations and requiring certain mixed-use developments of, 4+ family, multifamily homes. Some of that language has been removed. And so, we can certainly get you a copy of where the proposal stands now, and would love for you to weigh in on it and tell us what you're thinking and how you see its impact to Madison. But I think a lot of what folks have been concerned about, those concerns have been heard, and many things have been modified as a result of that.
Yeah, and I think that, because I know that we're getting through a lot of time, we have a lot to cover today, but I absolutely think that there are a lot of things that members of the community are very concerned about. And I know what has launched a lot of this, the Desegregate Connecticut, group that was advocating for certain things to happen. And it sounds like, during committee, things were considered and things came out quite differently. So we all use the analogy of making sausage, right? It goes through a process. I think it would be good. We'll have you back again, I think, to take a deeper dive maybe into some of this stuff, because this literally just came out of committee, I think, last Wednesday or Thursday. And then
quarterly is enough though, Peggy, for the legislative session will be over.
Yeah, no, I'm saying on this, but maybe if we can focus on a couple of topics for their next visit versus just providing an overall update.
Right.
And we could have them back either late April or early May, just depending on where certain, this particular issue is in the legislative process, or at least one of them can come back and kind of update us. And I think also they're accessible for the public. Clearly there are representatives, and when residents who are listening have specific issues or concerns, they have the ability to go directly to them, And each board member has the opportunity to go directly to them. I know I've had conversations. I've talked about the lack of a public hearing process and the ability for local people to weigh in on zoning issues. I've had those conversations directly with Christine and John Michael. So I encourage all of you, if you have specific, strong views about any legislation, you have the ability to reach out directly to them. They're representing all of us in Hartford, and so they're open to hearing those thoughts. And I think we can, obviously this is a concern, this specific issue we're going to be talking about later today more broadly about how we come up with our zoning regulations locally and as part of the plan of conservation and development, which is really the process that we go through as a town. But I think that, probably the best thing is to have them, come back when there's more specifics. So on this topic and, and kind of move on from there, because I'm looking, it's 8:37. And I know we have a lot of people on here that want to talk about the floodplain ordinance. So,
but quick final process thoughts though, Peggy,
Yep.
or it may be better for Christine, since you're the seasoned veteran in the General Assembly. The language that was removed in the committee and was put forward for consideration by the General Assembly, is that language now ineligible to come back into the legislation, or could that be put back in?
No, it could be put back in by amendment on the floor. So this is a Senate bill. So I'll obviously be watching it really carefully. It's bound, it certainly would be called on to the Senate floor first, and anybody has the ability to amend a bill on the floor with any language that they please. That could be completely not germane to the bill as well, but yes, that language could be put back in if somebody wanted to do that. It doesn't mean that it'll pass, but it could be put back in.
Okay. The second quick point is, you mentioned that in the public hearing that you heard from, or the committees heard from, town officials, and I don't know if you know, but I've proposed that this Board of Selectmen, through a resolution, which is really sort of the only non-legislative way we can communicate officially, that we express our position on this, so that as you continue to defend, for instance, John Michael, your position that local rule really should be preserved, that you can pull out and say, here the towns that I represent want this, and I'm taking this position because I'm representing these towns. So I really see it as a document that we can offer up in support of the positions that you already have. And so my question is there utility in that for you to be able to say to your colleagues in the General Assembly, this is where my town stands?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Bruce. I will say that I have that ability without a document. I am an equal voting member in the Senate. We sit there and we caucus legislation. Something as important as this, we will be spending hours on, and I will be sure to use my voice based on what the towns that I represent are telling me. And so I don't necessarily need a signed resolution or a piece of paper to ensure that the voices of Madison are heard. As long as you folks are communicating with me, telling me, what you want to see, what's particularly troublesome, then I can relay that information and be just as effective in helping to craft the language.
I think also that, that sets a dangerous precedence, because what issues do you have the resolution and what issues do you not have the resolution? So does that mean that the town isn't supporting something by not having a resolution? So I feel like it's selective about when we would do these things. There's a lot of, you heard the long list of issues that Christine and John Michael are wading through, many of which have a direct impact on our community. So by cherry picking certain ones where our board gets involved, I think, might send mixed signals to the legislature about what Madison cares about. So I would be concerned about setting that kind of precedent.
Well, and I'll also just point out, it's particularly important to understand where the Board of Selectmen stands as they represent the constituents, the residents of Madison. But, as with any large, piece, legislative proposal, we're hearing from all different folks, folks that don't think that this bill goes deep enough, folks that believe that local control should be given up and there should be mandates. And then we hear from folks that think that this bill should be thrown in the trash dead on arrival. And so it's figuring out where we are in between. And I know that you all experience those challenges as well as you represent the townspeople. So, we just have to figure out a balance here, figure out how to get to a good place for all of the towns and the residents that we represent. And I think we can do that by working together. I will say also that the new substitute language does broaden provisions around the Long Island Sound too, which is obviously particularly important for coastal communities. So we can make sure that we get you that, if you haven't seen it already, that substitute language for review.
My quick last thoughts on this, and Peggy and the board, thank you for your extended time with us. To Bruce's question, I think I certainly feel like being able to talk to my town leaders and speak on your behalf and advocate for and represent what you folks and the community share all sort of comes into consideration when I've taken votes in just my couple of months on the new job. Something that I think about is sort of painting with too broad a brush and sort of going over a lot of the specific contours that come up in these conversations. With all of these bills in the context of zoning and certainly everything else we look at, it's always about a balance. I think to Aaron's point earlier about, this is a topic that I think in terms of misinformation, frankly, just politicization. I think it's easy for folks to hear about things like, state takeover of zoning when I don't think that's actually what's happening. And so I want to be able to speak to the specific changes to these very technical policies around the Zoning Enabling Act and, what the state is guiding us towards, what the town is able to do. And I don't want to ask you folks to put yourself in a position to take too broad a brush on something that actually doesn't translate to specific policy. I don't need to tell a bunch of policymakers that it's all about the nitty gritty details and the weeds. So to me, hearing your thoughts and having conversations is great. I say that also to any members of the public that are here listening in. The best way to reach me is through email, through my CGA email address, which is online, and johnmichael.parker@cga.ct.gov. Happy to have lots of conversations that way. Also, as we mentioned before, we can share some summaries of the 6 or so bills. I've got them pulled up that did move through the committee that are going to be looked at, and that can spark specific conversations with members of the board here. And all of this stuff is available to the public if people just want to reach out to ask for it. So I'd be happy to engage in further conversations. But to your question, Bruce, I don't necessarily feel like we need to have a resolution to get a sense of what you folks are interested in directionally. But then also when it comes down to a specific judgment call that we need to make about how all these factors sort of play together, I think just to say that that's a very sort of specific process, and I don't know that the sort of broader strokes of a resolution are as helpful to that from my perspective. I hope that's helpful feedback.
Yeah. Can I just ask a quick question too? Well, I don't know if it's quick, hopefully, on affordable housing. So I'm working with Dave and some other members, committed members of our community on our affordable housing plan that's, mandated by the state, but also something that we really want, we're committed to. So just wondering how the proposed legislation will impact, our efforts in that regard, as far as our planning, if at all.
One of the bills that came through, 6107, actually has a specific piece about allowing towns to combine their plan of conservation development and affordable housing plan to sort of see how these two pieces, I think, really go hand in hand, maybe to what you're speaking about. It allows, it doesn't enforce it, so that doesn't have to happen. And then also, this bill, specifically 6107, creates a working group so that the state can offer some guidelines and thoughts, much as Christine shared earlier about waste management, right, where a working group has come together to offer some thoughts that then municipalities can take and work on. So Aaron, I think the idea, at least in a couple of these bills, is to try to support that process that's already happening, to sort of see that a bunch of these pieces actually fit together, and then to give towns the time to really work on implementing the plans that they come up with. But just to say, as you referenced him, and I see Dave is on this call, such a great resource, someone that I've spoken a lot with over these last few months to really think about what's happening in planning, what's happening in the affordable housing piece, certainly the environmental side, and how some of these things that we discussed in the legislature could impact Madison. Does that answer your question, Aaron?
Well, I was just wondering if it might negate, like if we take all this time to put this plan together and with recommendations, could the proposed legislation sort of negate all of our work?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Sorry, go ahead.
Just potentially could that happen?
Well, I think though our timing on the affordable housing plan is we have until July of next 2022. So this is going to be a 12-month process. So any current legislation is going to be, resolved by June, I guess. And I think anything we do in town, Hartford can decide to do something terribly different, over the years in terms of changing regulations or how we manage things. But I think that, as we work through our affordable housing timeline, there'll be an opportunity to incorporate or adjust or adapt based on any pending legislation that could end up being passed, by June. And that will be factored into our plan. And our plan of conservation and development is we're starting that process this summer, and that's part of what we're going to be talking about later. I think one of the things I've learned is we have all these silos, and yet they all interface and affect everything. And we've always had this discussion about we never have this broader strategic plan that pulls all this stuff together, and things are done in silos. And some of that's just because of what the regulatory requirements are or who has the authority to do that versus, whether it's planning and zoning versus the Board of Selectmen, whether it's Hartford. And I can understand it is a little frustrating, but I think the hopes is to try to pull this all into tandem over the next 12 months, since we are going to be starting our plan of conservation and development also this summer. So the timing actually kind of works good for us in terms of the affordable housing plan. But clearly, if there's going to be changes with the legislature pushes through, we will know that by the end of June, right? It would be something that would be passed and signed that would go into effect in July or whatever the timing would be in the legislation. So.
And just as Aaron, yes, agreed with all that, Peggy. And to your point, another bill 6611 about the fair share bill. I think a theme that's really emerging is trying to give towns clarity and a time period to enact some of the solutions that they come up with, sort of in that way of maintaining the element of local authority. So letting towns, not dictating what the plan has to look like, but giving towns the chance to create and work towards their own plan. I think that's something that's shared across a few of these bills. So we'd see what comes through. As Christine mentioned, and I've seen already, amendments and changes can come out of nowhere, but ultimately it's sort of about, I think, a coming to the center process when we're trying to get things passed to the full legislature. And so I don't expect that what would try to move forward would totally turn upside down stuff that Madison has been working on. But to Peggy's point, we'll know more in the next couple of months. And I really do think a theme that's driving this is giving towns a clear sense of timeline and the authority and the accountability to be able to make some of these changes locally that make most sense.
I'd like to get in the final question if I could, shift gears here. There's likely to be some federal dollars flowing our way from for infrastructure projects. I guess the size of those dollars is still being debated in Washington, but I was wondering if you had any insight for us as to what Madison needs to do to get ready for whatever dollars might be available in the not too distant future. Are there any things we need to put in motion right now or any lining up of projects that we need to start doing right now?
I think you all are doing a great job of, planning in the wake of, and really we're still in it, the pandemic, and figuring out what the needs of the town are and have been, to be able to report those back to the state. That's been happening on a regular basis. And as we get more information, John Michael and I will certainly be in touch. I know, Peggy will be having conversations with OPM and the governor's office as to, what towns, what's expected of towns through any application process that might need to be put into place. And so I think that you'll have the first word on exactly what needs to happen in order to make sure that Madison is well cared for.
I look forward to that. It's always nice to think about things that we can do and accomplish, right? So,
Absolutely.
and have the funding for it. So that's always a good thing. So, well, if it's okay, I suggest we move on. And, obviously there's a lot going on, and the next couple of months are going to be a busy time for you, but we want to have you back and maybe take a little bit of a deeper dive in specifics if, the board wants to have those conversations. So thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having us.
And appreciate it. And once again, I encourage any members of the public on, just to certainly reach out to both of them. If you have specific, strong views on any of the legislation that's going on right now, they're here to listen to you and represent you. So thank you.
Right. Thanks. Be well, everyone.
Thanks for your work.
Thank you.
So I guess we'll quickly move on. The next item on the agenda is my update. And I think I will just take a pass on it. It was just providing some updated. The positive news is we're really doing well on our vaccinations across our town. And so that was going to be the highlight, that we've gotten pretty much I think over 90% of our age, 74 and up, or all of our 74 and up, and 65 and over, I think we're in the 90% range, and we're in the 40% range for just general population in terms of people getting a first dose. And all our teachers who have wanted it have gotten a first dose. So we're making a lot of progress on vaccination. So I'll defer this in the nature of time, and we'll move on to liaison reports and selectmen comments. Anybody have anything today? Noting the time that we're at 8:54 already. So
no reports from me. Things have been pretty quiet. I want to thank Representative Parker and Senator Cohen for their generous time this morning. As you've mentioned, we have further down in the agenda the issue of taking a position as a board of selectmen, and I think that will be a robust conversation. I think that's where we can talk more about that. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here with that. So we can keep this thing moving.
Any other selectmen comments? No? Okay, so we'll move on to citizen comments. Lauren, do we have anybody for citizen comments?
I'll start moving them over. Fran Brady is first with his hand raised.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Fran Brady. I'm resident at 108 Genesee Lane up in North Madison. An idea came to me while reading all the good press about the Garden Club of Madison's efforts this year to plant 2,000 daffodils around town. It's been in a lot of different news articles, and even I think recently on the television news. I thought, hey, why not plant 2,000 trees? Then I really quickly realized that how expensive that would be, and how it would require a lot of effort. I wanted to share this idea though with the town board to see how they felt, particularly after I learned that May 2026, that's right, 2026, will be the 200th anniversary of the incorporation of Madison as a legal entity. So that would give us a lot of time to prepare. My wife, Kelly, and I are thinking of the idea of having a 5-year campaign, tentatively called Mad for Trees, to fund the plant, okay, you pick the number, X number of trees, could be the 200 or it could be 2,000. And we would do that in time for the anniversary, with the first tree planted next month, the 195th anniversary, at the pollinator garden at the library that we've been working on. And the last tree planted in 5 years. I believe we would need the town and a sponsoring local club with 501c3 charity status to help make this work. That's my thoughts. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Great idea, Fran. And I know you sent me an email about it. Thank you.
Joe McDougall is next.
Hi, guys. I'll be very quick. I'm actually here for the resilience thing later, but I did want to give you just a very brief update on the Charter Review Committee. The other CRC, guys, taking our acronym, knock it off. So very briefly, and thank you for all of you coming to meet with us at various times. We've met with the Board of Selectmen. We then met with the Board of Finance, because as you might imagine, that conversation is the best part to try and get between the two of your boards. We've also met with the Board of Ed, and later today, and Lauren's here with you early and she'll be with us late, we'll be meeting with all the land use boards. So we've kind of covered up the major town board groupings. We've had some time to talk with town staff as well. And our next phase is to start to go with blocking and tackling. But I want to give you that update just to say that to the extent that you're running up across issues that you think should come to our attention, particularly as we're dealing with if we talk a lot about emergency powers, but also with what's going on in the legislature, other items come up, to continue the open invitation to say, please let us know or reach out to me. And if there's anything that comes up charter wise, we'd be more than eager to hear it.
Great, thank you, appreciate it. Anybody else, Lauren?
Robert Patricelli is next.
Good morning, Selectmen. I'm Bob Patricelli. I've been a homeowner in Madison since 1991. My family and I own 4 homes along the beachfront on Parker Avenue and Parker Lane. And I've been particularly involved in the work of reviewing the Coastal Resiliency Commission. Is this the appropriate time to comment on that? I take it is. So I just want to urge you to think about the public policy issues behind this proposed ordinance. Our group has found no plausible public policy reason to support the recommendations for the changes in the ordinance. And the question, I think, for the selectmen is whether you all, as a matter of town policy, want to help the owners of older homes keep up those homes within the contours of federal law and regulation, or whether you want to make it even more difficult for them to do so, going beyond what the federal law requires. We have meticulously examined the federal law and regulations. We have gone through 1.4 million flood claims under the National Flood Insurance Plan. And I'll be sending you a legal and policy memorandum on all of this. But I can tell you without reservation that the current Madison ordinance, let alone the proposed changes, go beyond what federal law requires and makes it all the more difficult to keep up these older homes. Frankly, I'm uncomfortable with now the makeup of the CRC, learning what we've learned about the legal basis for all of this. And we would urge you to carefully consider whether additional members should be appointed to the CRC to review these matters going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to mention that there is an opportunity at the end of the meeting for public comment also. And you're welcome to have public comment here or at the end of the meeting. But if you want to wait through the discussion from on this topic on the agenda, you can also make public comment at the end of the meeting. So just want to put that out there.
Looks like there's a couple more.
Kim Brunstad is next.
Hi, thank you. I promise this time I'll be short. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, thank you. I would like to wholeheartedly second the comments that attorney, I may say his name wrong, Petroselli made. The amount of time that attorney Petroselli put into reviewing over 500 pages of not quite interesting FEMA regulations is really to be commended. I can't even imagine the legal bill that would be involved for the board if he were to present it to all of us. So I wanted to first thank him for his outstanding analysis, and second, his analysis as another attorney, yet from a different law school. I would also like to note that I think it's incredibly important that the subcommittee be open and upfront with any proposed new regulations or any changes. I frankly think it's time to scale back the existing legislation rather than to add to it. In fact, to add the proposals that the Coastal Resiliency Committee is trying to enforce for all the reasons stated, and I think I'm at 6 letters now to the board. For all of those reasons, I would like you to very much consider having future hearings on this, adding to the subcommittee's members, and giving a chance for the public to be included. And those hearings should not occur until FEMA has made any of its new announcements, so that all the potential homeowners that would be potentially subject to those having their homes placed in floodplain areas or having their homes designated as being in floodplain areas, that legislation or those FEMA rules would come into being. Again, for all the reasons I state, and for all the reasons Attorney Petroselli states in his letters and all the letters in opposition, I would very much encourage the board not to take any action now and to allow for future comment. And I would propose scaling back the existing legislation rather than making it worse. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Lauren, okay.
Dennis Crow.
Hi, morning, folks, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk today. I'd like to talk about all the legislation on the zoning issues and the housing, the affordable housing issues. And I'd like to ask the board to approve the resolution that Selectman Bruce Wilson is going to be bringing forward. There are a dozen bills that are up for discussion in the House and the Senate today. And while I understand your point that, Peggy, that the idea of a resolution for one thing but not for another might give rise to the implication that the other one's not a concern to us or not important, but this set of bills has such a large possibility of impact and a change to our towns that I believe it is necessary to go on record and say, this is what's important to the town of Madison. When you have the potential to change so much of what we do, and it is a change in our relationship with the state. First of all, there's the control of zoning itself, where a town could lose the ability to say that this house or this area here is limited in the number, how much you can put on this quarter-acre lot or acre lot or whatever. Then you add to that the density that's going to come up. Now you have problems with parking and sewage and other issues. And then some of the bills talk about mansion taxes. They mansion tax for a $400,000 house. How many houses in Madison are below that level? Not very many. Additionally, there's the idea of a fair share being determined by some other, the Office of Policy and Policy and Management. At any rate, they came up with a number about 1,400 houses for our town. And in order for a developer to say, okay, I'm going to set aside 10% of the houses to get to the 1,400, that's 14,000 houses he'd have to build in order to set aside 10% to reach the 1,400. If we don't meet that number, then according to Senator Cohen, the words for litigation have been pulled out, but they're still in on 6611, HB 6611. They're still there. And so that one hasn't come out of committee yet, but it's still there, which says at any advocacy group, .org, whatever, can decide, I think I'll go sue Madison. And they can plan this, they can do this by plan where they will selectively attack. We cannot afford the litigation costs associated with these things. So in sum, there's a lot of issues associated with this. I got no problem with that, affordable housing for people. My daughters would love to have affordable housing in town. I got a daughter that's renting because she can't afford a house right now. So I'm all in favor of it, but the dictates and the zoning and everything else that they have for not meeting some number that is just, it's impossible to change to that number of houses in a town like this. And we're just opening ourselves up to the litigation they're doing. So thank you.
Great, thank you for your comments. Lauren, anybody else from the public?
That is one more, Emil Geisenheimer.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking my comment. I would just like to add one thing on the coastal area management, and I'll probably speak on it later after we hear from the commission. But it seems to me that some of us have become very aware of what is in the proposal to date from Coastal Area Management Commission, but 160 homes are allegedly affected by this. And to the point made by Kim earlier, many more might be once FEMA does their new mapping, and that doesn't happen for some time. So it seems to me that the town has an obligation to notify each and every homeowner who might be affected by this legislation, so that everyone who's going to be directly affected has an opportunity to communicate with you guys about their concerns on this very, I think, wrong idea of imposing these requirements on homeowners. That's all I have to say now, but I'll comment later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is that it, Lauren, for now?
That is everyone who has their hand raised.
Okay, I'm sure we'll have some more later in the discussion. So the next couple of items on the agenda, just for the public's benefit, are more kind of routine business things that hopefully we can kind of push through quickly before we get to some of the more interesting discussion. So let's move on to item number 7. Can I get a motion to discuss and take action to approve accepting a historic document preservation grant in the amount of $5,500 and to authorize the first selectman to sign the contract?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any discussion or questions? This is just a routine item I think we do every year for this. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, all right. Item number 8 is discuss and take action to declare April 24th, 2021 Green Up Cleanup Day. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, great. And just real quickly for the public, which, we've been putting out notices about this, but every year I know that the town holds a Green Up Cleanup Day. It's going to be Saturday, April 24th from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. And there will be dumpsters as well as trash bags and different, supplies available both at the town green as well as up at Roberts Food Center in North Madison. So if you want to have as a group get together and pick apart our town to clean up as part of this effort, please reach out to my office, and there's also links on the website to do so. You can register a group, or just individuals can come, and then you can dispose of. And the idea is, let's clean up Madison for the spring and take pride in our town. And it kind of coincides around the time that Earth Day is, so it's a nice way to commemorate Earth Day. So I encourage everybody to attend. Any more discussion?
Just as an added incentive to anybody considering it, depending on where you clean up, there is a surprising amount of loose change that's discarded in town. I think my personal record on a green up cleanup day is $1.50. So there is money to be had if the environmental goodness of this is not enough.
Okay.
Between that
All
and
right.
cans, you can probably return the cans too.
Yeah, I know. Right, I was going to say the can.
can.
All right, great incentive. So all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. So we're excited to see that happen, and maybe we can beat the record in terms of tonnage of trash that we collect during on April 24th this year. So, okay, item number 9. So discuss and take action to modify a motion as follows: to approve a special appropriation request in the amount of $42,000 to purchase electronic message boards for the Emergency Management Department to display public safety announcements determined during the budget workshop cycle of the Board of Selectmen and pending Board of Finance approval. This modified action will satisfy all requirements for a town meeting under State of Connecticut Executive Order 7S. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, and just real quickly, this is something we actually approved before, but because the amount of for that department is over $50,000, because we had done something several months ago earlier for emergency management, it kicked us into the over $50,000 threshold. And because our charter then requires another step in the process, we needed to come back and make this amendment. So it's basically something we've all agreed that we wanted to support. But so any questions or no? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 All right, thank you. Oh yeah, I forgot. I wanted to actually real quickly, I wanted to make a motion to open the agenda to include an item number 9A relating to some hose equipment for the North Madison Volunteer Fire Company. I sent something out to the board. So can I get a second to do that?
Second.
Okay, great. Okay, and this is basically just adding an item that they're going to be using additional funds. So I guess now I read the oh no, so all in favor of adding it to the agenda?
Aye.
All right, great.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Okay, so now I'd like to make a motion to discuss and take action to approve the expenditure of $13,096.51 from the hose equipment account for the purchase of a new storage tank fill system and supplies for the North Madison Volunteer Fire Company.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, great. And then I sent you materials. This is just something out of an account. The funds are already in place, but because it's over $10,000, it requires Board of Selectmen approval. Any further discussion on that? Nope. Okay, great. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. All right. So that was 9A. Moving on to item number 10, which is just discuss establishment of a town facilities committee. So so Dave Anderson will be joining. This is a follow-up conversation about the kind of next steps from the town facility study that was completed. And I know the group has been meeting to talk about how we move forward with next steps on that and follow up. So I will turn it over. I know Aaron has been working and Scott Murphy have been working with Dave Anderson on this. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
I think actually, Scott, you backed me up on this. I think we voted Aaron was going to take the lead.
Oh, we most definitely did.
I'm sure you'll both jump in as needed.
No doubt. Happy to.
All right. So as Peggy mentioned, the town underwent a facilities review study, the purpose of which was to look at the conditions of the existing town-owned buildings, as well as how they're currently being used. And there were a number of recommendations that came out of that study, including the formation of a facilities committee, which is what our group has been working on to kind of define what that would look like and what the goals of that committee would be. In doing so, we also kind of realized that we have a number of sources of information that already exist, such as the Plan of Conservation and Development, which also recommended a facilities committee in its recommendations, as well as some information about space, how our buildings are being used, and what additional space is needed. to serve the community and to serve town operations. So the goal of the committee would be sort of to take these existing sources of information, as well as to identify what additional information is needed, and to kind of put everything together to make recommendations that are more broad focused and strategic on how we're using our current buildings, and to guide decision making from a more comprehensive kind of look at things. And so in coming up with the charge, that was based on these conversations that we've had in our committee, as well as looking at the charges of some other towns, such as Guilford, who has had a committee. And actually, Dave, you'll probably correct me, but we're calling it a task force. So
Yeah,
sort of a
I guess our proposal calls it a working group, which is kind of how we've been operating up to this point with the facilities assessment. And I believe Guilford's was a task force.
Right. So in my mind, I guess I forgot the specific meanings, but in my mind, it's just a group of people who are kind of working on this together, but it's specifically called a task force. And we also looked at the, a master facilities plan is not a new thing. I mean, there are a lot of communities, municipalities who have undergone, a process. So looked at some of their plans to come up with some of the guidelines for this task force and what it was intending to accomplish.
Yeah, and I think that to build on what you're saying, Erin, I think that doesn't preclude us from not moving forward with a potential master plan. I think this task force, working group, whatever we want to call ourselves, sort of wrestled with the idea of continuing with the existing vendor. Do we move into an RFP process for another vendor? Do we gain some facilitation in our decision-making process to help guide our thinking? I think all is still on the table. I don't think we've ruled anything out. I think we're just in the process of standing up the committee and getting a charge in place and continuing the work. I feel like it's been a pretty effective group to work with in terms of open, candid discussion and collaboration with our town staff, who has been very engaged in this process. So I've been encouraged based on what we've come up with, and my hope is that we can leverage this plan of conservation more than we have in the past, so that we can make some very thoughtful decisions for the town.
I think I think you guys have done an incredible amount of work, and it's great to see so much thoughtfulness and collaboration in terms of kind of moving this process forward, and also just how we went through the whole facilities process. My only red flag is we obviously are going to be relying a lot on this to make decisions, and the one thing that we have so many things that are pending right now because of discussion and review and analysis. And so if you guys feel this is the right direction to head into in order that allows us to get to that decision-making point, then I totally support it, because you guys have been living this since last September, I think, is when the committee started, or actually when we wrote the original RFP, right? So my only caution is that, is having milestones and timeline to make sure that we're moving things along, because you guys are obviously, most of you on that committee are volunteers, and this is a huge time commitment that you're making, and you all have jobs and families and obligations outside of this. So and then our staff have obviously a lot on their plate as well, and I know Dave particularly has a lot that he's juggling. So I think just my recommendation is to make sure there's some clear milestones and guide timeline that you're working on as you kind of move forward in this.
I had a question about whether this task force has any decision-making authority, and whether this task force would require any budget.
I'll answer the first one. So no, we don't have any decision-making authority. All the authority would still reside with the Board of Selectmen. We just have the ability to make recommendations. Second, there is some funding available that was budgeted for the initial facilities assessment. So Bill McMinn, I guess, has really that in his budget. That money would be available to hire a consultant if needed, is determined really by this group. And then if additional funding is needed, we would need to come back to the Board of Selectmen. But I think there is some funding available to, at the very least, to get us started. But I think fairly significant amount.
Dave, if this task force wished to hire a consultant for some reason, would they have the authority to do that on their own? Or is that, again, a recommendation to the selectmen?
Well, my opinion is that we would share that process with the selectmen to make sure you're informed, because really, we're, I say serving really at the pleasure, but really we're trying to help the selectmen out in terms of their decision making. So you'd be involved at one level or another. We wouldn't do anything in a vacuum.
And I think also just our processes would require, if we were going to be spending a certain thresholds and things like that, we'd have to go through the board approval anyways, process anyway, right? But fair enough.
Did we want to approve the charge at this point, Peggy, from a process standpoint? How do we
yeah, I guess that's what was sent. Wasn't really you want to make a motion then for your charge?
Yeah, do we want to read it out loud, or do?
Yeah, I think you probably want to do that. So I don't know.
Aaron, do you have it in front of you? I didn't pull it up, of course.
Don't. I was hoping someone would put it on the
Oh,
screen.
I have it printed.
You want to just read it, Peggy? Do you mind?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So this would be a motion to approve the charge of the facilities working group. And the charge would include to make recommendations for the optimization of the town's existing buildings and facilities, which may include best use, reuse, restoration, improvement, or disposal of existing buildings. Do you want me to read all of that? Do we need all of that in the charge? The working group will evaluate. Do you want me to put all of it in the charge, or just the simple first statement?
No, I put the whole thing in.
Okay, to do this, the working group will evaluate current and projected usage by town operations and programming for the community, the need for additional space for these purposes, as well as the desire of the community. The committee will consider this information in conjunction with the building conditions and projected maintenance costs as outlined in the Town of Madison Facilities Assessment completed March 2021. Recommendations should be consistent with the town's plan of conservation and development. Can I get a second?
Before you do anything, I need you to motion to open the agenda to make this item 10A so that you can actually vote to approve this.
Okay, well, that's right. We're just
I'll motion to open the agenda to make this 10A to motion to approve the charge of the facilities working group.
Yeah.
I'll second it.
Okay, and then I just read the motion that we would be voting on. Any further discussion?
Did you get a second on the motion?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not on the agenda. Okay. All right. So all in favor of the charge for the facilities working group, as I just read a few minutes ago, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Okay, great. So I would request maybe, come back, with a report back and also some sort of timeline or milestones. I think that would be helpful to have so we can kind of understand a little bit more about what your process is going to be. Okay.
We have just so you know, we have a meeting scheduled already for next Friday and then kind of 2 weeks thereafter. So
okay.
We have a standing meeting Friday mornings.
Okay, great. All right, good. All right, so we'll move on to number 11. Which is discuss plan of conservation development and zoning regulations. So just to kind of kick this off, Dave will continue to join us, but this is something David and I have been talking about quite a bit over the last couple of months. Clearly there's been some controversial development projects over the last year in town. A lot of members of the public have reached out to me at times to ask about why things have been allowed or why they haven't been allowed, and what is kind of the process for zoning regulations. And then there's been this whole other discussion, at the state level about zoning regulations. So my intention today was more to just talk about where we are as a town right now, what zoning regulations we have in place, and what drove those zoning regulations. And the Plan of Conservation Development is a plan that is actually developed by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and it comes up with recommendations. And we're actually due to start that process again, starting this summer. So I think a lot of the public concerns, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for the public to weigh in on the future plan. because part of that involves, public hearings. And so this will be an ongoing process that we go through. And for people that have concerns about maybe some of our zoning regulations currently that feel that they need to be changed or improved or whatever, there's going to be an opportunity to weigh in on that. So I'll turn it over to Dave to talk a little bit about that and our plan of conservation development.
Yeah, sure. Before I do, I just want to take a second to pause because I know it's 9:30, and I know we do have a topic on the agenda that I'm also involved with about the floodplain ordinance. And so I'm happy to dive, very minimally into this and come back at a future meeting. We can dive a little bit deeper, but I just want to give you guys an opportunity in terms of how you'd like to spend the time in the meeting. Would you like to spend some time doing this, or would you like to maybe punt this to another meeting? I just want to be sensitive to people that are on the line.
I mean, I think that we could spend a few minutes talking. This
Right.
is going to be a bigger discussion, but
Yeah, so why don't I just kind of dive into it a little bit, and then I'm happy to come back and go into it a little bit deeper. But I guess to start, I'm just going to share my screen. And I think just to describe what a plan of conservation and development is, I'm going to go right to page 1 of our current plan of conservation and development, which you could find on the town website under the Planning and Zoning Department. So plan of conservation and development is a strategic plan for the physical development of a community. It is an advisory document which is intended to guide local actions and to provide a framework for consistent decision-making with regard to conservation and development activities over the next decade or so. And over the next decade, the actual state Connecticut general statutes require towns to update new plans of conservation and development every 10 years. Our current plan was adopted in November 2013, so we'll need to have a new plan adopted in November 2023. We do have funding in the capital improvement plan to hire a consultant to assist us with that. And as Peggy mentioned earlier, we will be starting on that sometime, late summer, early fall. Since the plan of conservation and development helps guide local actions towards outcomes considered beneficial for the community and or desired by residents, there are a few documents which can have a greater potential for long-term influence on the Madison we know and love. And so that's just a little bit of a brief description of what it is. So I know the Board of Selectmen have, considered and made some effort to do their own strategic plan. Now, I think the plan of conservation and development can serve in that same capacity with probably some more robust involvement from the Board of Selectmen. I know last round, I'll pull up just another page here in a second. There was a steering committee that was put in place to help guide our current plan. And so there was 25 members of the steering committee. And there were representatives of various boards and commissions. Actually, Joe McDougald was a representative of the Board of Selectmen at that time. And then there were 5 citizens at large. So a total, again, of 25 people. And this document was created over a period of 2 years. So there were telephone surveys to gauge the community's input on a myriad of different items. There were public meetings, charrettes, and then eventually that all coalesced into a draft document. And so that draft document was shared with the public a number of times. And then eventually there was a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission for a final plan of conservation and development that was referred to our Regional Council of Governments for review. So they review it for consistency with the state plan of conservation and development. It actually gets referred to the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Selectmen have an opportunity to weigh in fully on the document. And then ultimately the Planning and Zoning Commission holds a final public hearing and then adopted the document in October 2013, and it was effective November 2013. So it is a really community-driven process. And so the Planning and Zoning Commission used this document in terms of guiding its decision-making on applications for development that might come across, but also in terms of any regulation changes that they might consider making. And so I'm sorry, I can't share the screen without coming back and forth here. But one of the, I know topics that has come up most recently is in terms of additional housing density in town and some regulation changes that might have been enacted to enable some of those things. And so I just want to share with you briefly, I think this is page 40 in the Plan of Conservation and Development. And so it says Madison Center and surrounding areas could support additional housing development, and this could help meet overall housing needs in the community. Townhouses, apartments, above retail stores and condominiums near the train station can contribute to a healthy and vibrant Madison Center and help meet the housing needs of a diverse community. And so there's some policies here and there's some tasks. So the policies is encourage additional development in Madison Center by taking the recommendations of the Bradley Road Vision Study, encourage the creation of additional housing opportunities in Madison Center. Then it talks about seek ways to implement the Bradley Road Vision Study. So the commission, as a result of that guidance in the Plan of Conservation and Development, did a few things. One is they allowed, basically removed the density limitations in the downtown district that prohibited kind of full-scale apartment construction. And so they did that in a way that preserved the kind of active commercial uses along Boston Post Road and along Wall Street, because we still wanted to have, you know, the restaurants and the retail shops and everything dominating. But in areas that weren't such active Main Street corridors, such as Bradley Road or rear buildings on Wall Street, they changed the regulations to allow some additional development opportunities. So far, we just received one application under that change for a small 9-unit complex that was approved off of Wall Street. It has not been constructed yet. And most recently, we've received an application actually from Davis Realty for the property adjacent to the Hearth for a 30-unit apartment building there. That project has secured wetlands approval, but it's still going through the Planning and Zoning Commission approval process. And so that regulation change in response to the Plan of Conservation and Development has resulted in successful projects. Another change we made a little bit outside of the downtown area, but still within proximity to our commercial areas, is our transition district, which is the district basically that lies between a commercial area and a residential area. It literally serves as a transition. So previously, it just allowed limited commercial use as a transition between residential to commercial. We changed the regulations to also allow multifamily to serve in that same style of transition. So a project was proposed under that regulation was Bob Daller's project, which got sold to the Hope Partnership. So as part of our regulation change, we required a 10% affordable housing minimum in order to achieve certain densities. And so that project was originally approved with just that 10%. And then the Hope Partnership came along and increased the percentage of affordable housing. So that's a really, I think, a great project for the town that's going to be coming in the pipeline in the next couple of years. It was all due to that regulation change. There was another 10-unit project a little bit further down the road, which has one affordable rental unit in it as well. And then the one that's been the topic most recently is the small cluster housing regulations. And so that regulation was enacted again pursuant to the language in the Plan of Conservation and Development, trying to seek opportunities for additional housing density in Madison Center and the transition to Madison Center. So the first project that was approved under that regulation was the General's Residence project. So that was certainly a project that had a lot of community conversation surrounding it. In the first iteration of that approval, the actual General's Residence was to be restored and renovated. And that's what the Planning and Zoning Commission first approved for that project. Unfortunately, that didn't pan out at that time. And so there was a new developer came along, and the economics were such that they proposed basically rebuilding the General's Residence, and that was reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission. There was actually also a referral made to both the Historic District Commission and the Madison Historical Society, and the project was approved, what you see being constructed today. But again, those regulation changes were all rooted in the Plan of Conservation and Development. And so the manner in which these regulation changes happen is the Planning and Zoning Commission has a standing meeting every month, what they call a planning meeting. So it's the first Thursday of the month. And in that meeting, they don't typically entertain applications. They talk about concepts, regulatory changes, And the Planning and Zoning Commission typically meets several times in an open meeting format where they discuss the possibility of, for instance, cluster housing regulation. So that particular regulation probably had 3 or 4 planning type meetings where we discussed it. And then ultimately, before the Planning and Zoning Commission can actually propose and enact a regulation, they have to hold a public hearing and allow for the public to have input onto that proposal. I'll tell you, there's been a dramatic shift in participation since we've been moved over to Zoom, and in a positive way. We have a lot more community engagement in all our meetings because of Zoom, which I think is a positive thing. We also been, I think, thankfully forced to be a little bit better about getting all our application materials and proposals up on the website. And that's helped also have a bit higher level of community engagement. So I think there's been some perception that the commission has done, and other commissions have done things kind of in the dark, without a lot of public involvement. It's not because we were doing it in the dark. It's just, I think people were not as engaged and as easily able to get to these meetings as they are now. But I think what you'll find is our process is not going to be changing going forward, but we probably will have a lot more public participation just by virtue of the mechanisms we're using to disseminate information now and to communicate to the public. So I anticipate with this next Plan of Conservation and Development update, and with any regulatory changes going forward, we will have a lot more public involvement because of these changes. And I think that's a good thing. And I think, it'd be nice, especially as we go into this next Plan of Conservation and Development update, I invite the board to participate very fully in that process. And I know the Planning and Zoning Commission has also talked about that in the past, is they want the Board of Selectmen to participate very fully in that process, because we'd like this document to serve as a guiding document for this board as well. And so you can consistently refer to it when making decisions, and then we all are working as a team to, to better the community in a way which the community has, said they want to move. So
yeah, I definitely think that, one of the things that Dave and I've talked about over the last year is that, this concept of a strategic plan, the Plan of Conservation Development is really the heart of that. And then there's also going to be this facilities planning piece in terms of our town buildings and community services. So I think this is going to be a good starting point. The more that the board is involved in kind of the Plan of Conservation Development process, I still think we're going to need that overarching umbrella that pulls all of these things together as an overall kind of community strategic plan. But the Plan of Conservation and Development, I will say, is if you read it, it reads like a strategic plan. I remember reading it really kind of during the campaign and thinking like, this is kind of a strategic plan, but there's, things that are missing. And so we've been trying to fill in some of those holes. And it's all kind of coming together from a timing standpoint. And then we talked about affordable housing. I mean, that clearly should be pulled in under this umbrella as well, so that everything kinds of is in sync and it's not conflicting at times. The other thing we've talked a lot about is communication and being more outreaching to the public, pushing information to the public rather than reacting to the public, or just doing what is required by regulation. And I think that, the Planning and Zoning Commission does everything that they're required by law to do. There's requirements about how meetings are posted, but some of this is very dated. And I know the state legislature is actually looking to update some of that to, we still have to publish things in the newspapers, and that has a timeline that pushes the boards into in terms of meeting those timelines, because we're publishing in newspapers. So some of the updates at the state level might be happening that will allow notifications on website. Right now, everything we do outside of the state is something we just do as a courtesy to the public. But I think with our new Madison alert system, we're going to try to make that more push information out to the public proactively ahead of time, so people are more aware of what's going to be on agendas and what topics are going to be talked about. And we're trying to figure out what is the right things to use that platform for. So I think the town will be getting a lot more information about how to participate in these things, how to weigh in. And David mentioned there'll be surveys done. The town, it's been, almost 10 years, and things have changed a lot in 10 years, I think, in our town. And obviously we've been through this pandemic as well, where we reflect on our values might have changed in 10 years because of the pandemic. So I think the timing for us looking at these things, and it suits us well. So, and the public will have a lot of opportunity to weigh in. So, I think that's a helpful first step. And I think this is going to be an ongoing discussion for us. I don't know if we want to have any more discussion on this, because I know we do have a lot of people waiting on item number 12. So I'll open up to the board.
Yeah, I mean,
I guess I just had one comment. Sorry, Bruce.
No, you go ahead.
Dave, you and I had a conversation yesterday, and I'll be honest, I think it was enlightening to me. It really helped. You were sort of my zoning translator, and it helped me to think about, how these changes truly impact Madison. Some of the proposed changes that are being discussed, I think, mostly on social media. Could you just give us your sound bites of how that plays out? I know you sort of spoke a little bit to me about, the apartments as an example, and that, change of 800 square feet to 1,000 square feet. And that was helpful for me to understand.
You're talking about you're talking about the legislation up in Hartford.
Correct.
Regarding affordable housing. Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't clear.
No, that's okay. I'll speak for myself, and then I'll just kind of reference that we've had a few conversations at the Planning and Zoning Commission about this as well. And so, my takeaway from the conversations at the Planning and Zoning Commission were the Planning and Zoning Commission does prefer local control. They prefer our kind of community-driven process that guides our plan of conservation and development and our regulation changes. They also very strongly expressed that we recognize that we need to continue to do better in terms of providing affordable housing within our community. We think we're at a point where we're making strides, and we'd like to continue on that trajectory. They did say, a few folks, that either whether it's our town or other towns in the state, after a period of time, they could understand where the state might need to give us an extra nudge. I think that it's just thinking that we're on the right track now, and let us try to go in the direction we're going, because I think we're going to have some success. So an interesting thing, the original Desegregate Connecticut bill had a few provisions within it. One was requiring communities to allow accessory apartments. So the town of Madison has done that since, I think, 1981. So we allow accessory apartments up to 800 square feet. The current bill now says, suggests they should be 1,000 square feet, which is honestly something the Planning and Zoning Commission has talked about changing that. And that was driven by some community feedback, where folks that have wanted to build accessory apartments for, say, their mother-in-law, or maybe even a college son or daughter moving back, have felt the 800 is a little restrictive. So we've had conversations about that. There were a provision about increased density near transit, which again I just described to you with the project off of Bradley Road. So we made regulation changes to allow increased density near transit. There were some provisions about what they called Main Street development. So additional either multifamily development or specifically cluster housing near Main Street, so within a quarter mile of Main Street. And honestly, those recommendations were mirrored with some of the regulations changes we've made. So in my mind, I know that the controversial component about that that legislation was it took away local control, but I was satisfied to see that we're moving in the right direction in terms of the ideas that that Desegregate Connecticut group is trying to bring the state. We're already going in that direction, which I was really happy and pleased to see, and the commission was as well. So some of the concepts in there are not entirely scary to me or to the Planning and Zoning Commission. I think it's just really important locally to have a community-driven process that leads to some of these regulations. So
very helpful. Thanks, Dave.
And I think that's a fabulous transition into the thought that I brought up in our last meeting, and then the subsequent draft resolution, which was just that, right? It was a place to get our conversation started, and at its core, it's saying that we are as a town making significant strides forward, and that we want to transmit up to the state and to our elected representatives that we're working on this, and we're actively working on this. We don't have our head in the sand, and we don't need the state to step in and correct us for the transgressions of other cities or towns in the state. I think it's entirely appropriate that we avail ourselves of really the only official communication method that we have as a board, and that is through resolution. It's nice that we can talk as citizens to our elected state officials, but when we talk individually, that's exactly what we're doing. We're not talking as a board. And this issue could have a profound and lasting impact on the town of Madison if we sit by and let this come about without any comment. And I would put up as an example, had we understood better what the passport to Connecticut parks was likely to have on the town of Madison, and our beaches in the summer, I think that we would have seen the community and the selectmen at the time take a much more active role in expressing our concern about that suggested change. That we didn't see it, and we weren't active, but I think we absolutely would have in that case. So I don't see any conflict with this board standing up and speaking to the legislature and specifically our elected representatives to let them know that we have real concerns about this. So I think, Peggy, I'd asked for this to be in the agenda. This was for discussion. I think this was the point in the agenda you intended.
No, but I actually, Dave and I talked about having a discussion of our zoning and plan of conservation development for a while. In terms of the resolution, I just reiterate my comments earlier that there are a lot of controversial things that are going to impact the citizens of Madison and are going to impact town operations. And if we use our board meetings to debate and deliberate about matters that are going on in Hartford, I think is doing a disservice to the community. We should, this whole concept of stay in your lane. We as individuals, and I as the first selectman, can make comments and submit things. You can go and do testimony. We could, there's other channels, but I think to spend this meeting debating wording and a resolution, and this is one topic. Now, what about last year, police accountability? Believe me, I got tons of emails. The chief of police got tons of emails. Our elected officials did. There's marijuana legislation. There's vaccination requirement legislation. There's lots of legislation every year that the legislature goes through that people in this community are going to be impacted directly, and it's going to affect town operations. And I think for this board to debate, at every meeting, a topic, when do we pick what rises to that occasion or not? That's all. I think having discussion is great, but to take formal action and put voting involved, it to me is just sending a dangerous precedent, because now it becomes politicized. Every issue in Hartford now can be brought down to this board for voting and debating. And I just don't think it's the right, it doesn't matter where you fall on the issue. And I think it just sends a precedence. That's all. So the conversation is great. And I think our legislatures have heard it. The public has had the discussion, but that's very different than, creating us as a shadow legislature for Hartford. And so, that's where I just feel strongly, and this is not because of zoning. I think I've shared my views with our representatives, and Dave and I have talked at length about this. And I actually watched the desegregate. I had the presentation from Desegregate Connecticut. So there were things that were concerning to me, and I've expressed my views on those. But I think it's going through the process, and I think they've also heard from the public a lot. There's been tons of discussion in the public, and they are hearing that, and the committee has reflected that at the state level. So, anyway, I just this is not about zoning in particular, and of course it's going to have a big impact on us, but regulation always does. I just don't want us using this platform to continually debate political issues that are legislative issues, statewide issues, and not, I want us to focus on the next thing on our agenda, number 12.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. But I don't think we continually debate state issues in these board meetings. Two, this is a uniquely profound change to the way Madison is governed, potentially. And I appreciate that a lot of the language came out of committee, but we heard Christine say it could go back in. So to take our foot off the gas as individuals or as any local government, I think is a mistake. Until that is voted on by the General Assembly, anything can happen. And I don't think it is a misuse of this board to stand up on behalf of the residents of the town of Madison. I don't think that that's ever a problem. I agree that there are many issues that go on in the state that affect us as citizens of Connecticut. And in the sense that we are all residents of Madison, that impacts us. I'm not a big fan of the gas tax, but I would never propose that we debate that here in the Board of Selectmen. But if the state were to come up with a plan to widen Route 1 to 4 lanes, I think that would be appropriate for discussion here at the Board of Selectmen. If the state were to debate discontinuing pilot funds, I think that would be an appropriate discussion for the town, for the Board of Selectmen in the town of Madison. That they want to, and these are serious people having serious conversations in Hartford. This is not frivolous wish list.
I don't think any of this is frivolous. I think everything we
No,
do,
I mean, up
I'm
in
just saying,
Hartford.
we've spent how much time talking about zoning regulations when we have a real legislative thing that our board under charter is responsible for, and that is the floodplain ordinance. That is in our lane. We're not asking John Michael and Christine to, sit there and vote on the floodplain ordinance, right? Because it's not in their purview. It's not under their jurisdiction. And so I'm just, to me, this is more about precedence and using our time to focus on the things that matter the most. And this is an important issue. I think we've had the debate, we've had the discussion. They're going to come back and talk more in detail about specifics that are going to be discussed, which we've agreed we will have them do. That's all. I just
hang on. Can I chime in? Because Bruce, we clearly understand your point of view on this. Yeah. You've talked about this at multiple meetings, so I get your perspective, and I get that you want to put forward this resolution. You and I have talked about this privately as well. I am not in support of setting this, I think, dangerous precedent of us communicating about state level issues. I think we have an opportunity to have our legislators come like we did today, and we have a healthy discussion about the issue, and we provide some individual feedback. We also personally, and you personally, have a channel directly to these legislators, of which you may or may not have taken advantage of. And I think that's an opportunity for all citizens and all leaders in town to go and speak with our legislators and let them do their job. As Peggy says, stay in their lane. But for us to then be setting a precedent on creating a resolution based on speculation, or in your own words, potentially, or could happen at any time, I think that's dangerous. I don't think that's something we should be spending a lot of time on. I think if there's an issue that impacts Madison, we have our legislators come and speak with them, and we engage in a conversation. I'm fully supportive of that. I think that's a wonderful thing we should be doing, and potentially should be doing more of. But I don't think we need to be setting resolutions to put down our point of view here. I don't think it's needed, personally.
Bruce, I'm not yet persuaded that we should break our longstanding practice as selectmen to not be focusing totally on town business. Over the past decades, this Board of Selectmen has wisely and prudently focused on town business. In fact, if you look at our agenda today, there's a lot of town business for us to be working on, and at the moment, we're delaying working on town business, having this debate about whether we have a role to play in the state legislative process. Our state delegation is accessible. They listen, they question us, they understand the issues. They've been elected by the broad public to go up and represent us in Hartford. So I am not yet persuaded that this Board of Selectmen should become a shadow government to the state legislature. There's too much business that our residents want us to focus on.
So I don't know where this notion of shadow government is coming from, but Al, you were on the Board of Selectmen, as was Scott and I, when we created a fracking waste ban ordinance, not a resolution, but an actual ordinance in town that largely was duplicative of existing state law. So the idea that this is without precedent, I just can't accept. We have recent precedent where we've stepped in and made official legal commentary on issues. So I appreciate that we have an intellectual disagreement here. I really do. I believe this is a moment for us to represent the citizens of the town in what is not a political issue for us at all. It is simply a statement that we're working hard and actually making progress. The needs out there, I think, are real and deserve serious discussion, but the transgressions aren't ours. The punishment shouldn't be on us for it.
But again, Bruce, we should focus on things that impact Madison.
1 second, Scott. The idea that we don't have time to discuss this, I think, is...
No one said we don't have time to discuss it, but we have had a discussion. We had probably 40 minutes at the beginning with our legislatures, and now we're having another 20 minutes debating about theoretically whether or not we should be doing this. It's not an action item on the agenda. We had a discussion about zoning. I will bring it back up at the next meeting and we can talk more about it. But we also have how many members of the public, 50 members of the public, that want to talk about something that this board is supposed to be taking action on, that it is authorized under our town charter to do, and that is pass legislation regarding floodplain.
Well,
so that's all.
Can I have an opportunity to weigh in as well? So I don't think I'm ready to take a position on a resolution, but I do want to just make the point that I do think that this particular topic, as well as topics such as these, are important for us as a board to discuss and to recognize, because our residents are asking us, and I understand technically that is in the purview of our state representatives, but we're still being asked, and I think it's important that we do have the discussion and we do provide a forum for the public to be able to gather information. I mean, this particular issue involves multiple bills that are going through multiple committees. I mean, it's hard to stay on top of this. And so I think it's important that we at least have some discussion on these issues. And, I think it was, I was surprised at how hard it was just to get everyone to agree to have them to come and talk, because I think
that's not, I mean, I've always been, I said in my email that I was planning on having them come at the end of April, and I moved it up to be accommodating.
I didn't say you, Peggy. I said there was some pushback, and I think that we need to be mindful of what we're charged with, but I also think that we can't just let big issues like this.
I completely agree that this is a healthy discussion, and happy to have the conversation. And, I think it's more about is just what our role is in terms of, voting on specifics. That's all. And even some of the stuff that I had proposed, about sentiment issues, about, we made some statements about the January 6th, the Black Lives Matter protests. Those were done as in public comment, which Bruce has had the opportunity to provide his views, and it was not an agenda item and it was not a formal resolution. So I think it's, we can make those kinds of things as a sentiment, but it's very different, I feel like, when you actually put it as part of the public record as an agenda item, a formal debate, and then a vote. So Aaron, I completely agree with you. And I absolutely want us to have these discussions, because it is going to impact Madison residents. It's going to impact how town operations work. I think it's just the nature and how that is done versus somebody throwing out resolutions on Facebook and proposing things that is not very Madison specific. It's kind of a generic document that was lifted from somewhere. for us to debate. So I just, that's all. And I know we've had a lot of discussion. This will be, again, I'll put it on the next agenda. We can talk more about it. Okay. But I do feel like we should move on and, carry on to what is an item that is under our charter that we have responsibility for, and that's passing legislation that directly affects Madison. Is everybody okay moving on? Or Bruce, you look like you're going to say something again, so I don't want to
No. I'm
close
just
it down.
We're talking about us passing floodplain regulations, and our agenda item is to review.
Oh, I know that, but I'm saying, but we're talking about something that we actually have authority to vote on. We're not doing that today. You're absolutely right. It's to review.
Okay. So I will be seeking further conversation about this, and I think we need to devote some more time to it. So I for the record, for what it's worth, I can't support any legislation from the state or from the town, if that matter, that seeks to silence the input and voice of community members on issues that impact them. I don't feel this is a very risky position to take. I believe that this is well within the vast majority of what Madison residents would hope that we do as elected officials, as a board of selectmen, and I see no harm in us affirming that position, and would love to hear why, in more detail, some of the members of the board of selectmen do see harm in taking that position and affirming that position.
Okay. Well, so if it's all right, can we move on to item number 12? And the review of the draft of floodplain ordinance and comments from the March 22nd, 2021 public hearing. I just want to remind the public that's here today, if you didn't attend the hearing, but my husband and I do own a property that's going to be impacted by this, that's in the flood zone. And after consultation with town attorney and based on our ethics policy, I am, out of abundance of caution, going to be recusing myself from this discussion today regarding the floodplain ordinance. So I will turn the virtual gavel over to Scott Murphy, the acting first selectman, and I will just be sitting here listening. So.
Very good. So I think we have some presenters that we're going to bring
Scott,
into the conversation here.
There's several members of the Coastal Resiliency Commission on, and I think they just wanted a few minutes to not a full-blown PowerPoint presentation, but just a few minutes to give you guys kind of an update on our thinking, the committee's thinking, and then you take it from there. And again, no one's asking for any action to be taken today. This is just a continuation of the conversation from the public hearing. So.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I think I'm encouraged that and thankful that the committee listened to the public based on the public hearing and is going back and rethinking some of their recommendations that they're coming back to the Board of Selectmen with. So Hank, am I turning it over to you to start the conversation as the chair?
If you don't mind, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, please.
All right.
Well,
thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all today. Yeah, as you mentioned, we had a lot of feedback from our last meeting, which we appreciate, and also the commission spent a lot of time. At least the people that presented to you the last time spent a lot of time in discussion on it, pretty much daily, frankly. And one of the things that came up in our discussion, it really struck me and the others also, is I think when we first came to the Board of Selectmen, not this previous meeting, but the meeting before that, sort of the first introductory hi, how are you from the commission. One of the last things I mentioned to the Board of Selectmen was, a lot of the things that we're going to do are not going to be easy. And so, we're not necessarily going to bring confirmation that, yes, our current regulations take into account sea level rise in 20 or 30 years. And so one of the things that came up with this latest FPO discussion was we amended or are making some recommendations for not necessarily today, but for 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And probably there'll be other people on this commission rewriting those and amending those as needed, possibly depending on what happens in this area. So we've kind of had this, and with the recommendations and the presentation that we made, we kind of have this dichotomy between today and tomorrow. And so we're trying to cover today and tomorrow with one document and one set of regulations. So what we did in our discussions was recognizing, look, we've got a problem with today because we have a number of people that are affected because they have projects, or they're planning on projects, or they're trying to complete things, and they're bumping up against particularly this the look back provision. And so part of our thinking was, let's change our approach to that, which we're going to discuss. But I think the background, at least to me and to the commission, was, the immediacy of people's condition today, but being mindful of where are we going? What is the commission supposed to be looking forward to? And we're looking forward to a different time zone, time place than maybe a homeowner that's working on a project and trying to get it finished by the end of the year or the middle of next year is their timeline. So with that, we look back and we've suggested and recommended to you and submitted some, I think you all have them by now, but a couple of areas that we focused on, which were the ones that were under the most discussion in our last meeting, was the look back period, which we're going to address and give you some details about how we think we might be able to take care of the current issues, but also be true to our task of preparing the town for the future. The other one was some clarifications that came up in some of the comments and emails that came through, specifically on what is substantial improvement, appraisal value, and what does the town use. And then there was one that came up about historic structures, and so we have some information on that would help clarify some of those issues. So I'd ask Woody Weiss, if he could, to go through the look back period and the items I just mentioned, and provide the revised recommendations for those items particularly the revised recommendation on the look back. The others are just the clarification I mentioned. So Woody, if you're available, please.
I am, Hank. Thank you. And thank you for your comments. We all spent a great deal of time reviewing what our residents have mentioned was an issue to them. So we're proposing that we stay with our 1-year look back period until July 1st, 2023. So there'll be no change in that, and it'll proceed as it's proceeded before, with a 1-year look back until 2 years from July 1st. After that, the look back period becomes 5 years. However, rather than remaining where we have a look back and we actually look back, we're proposing that the look back date of July 1st, 2023 is what we would look back to from July 2nd on. In essence, it clears the slate of any work that was done the previous year. So that if you, for example, have someone that does substantial improvement during the next 2 years, if you then had a 5-year look back, that work that people did during that period would be included. What we're suggesting to make this transition smoother and fairer for all is that the look back date of July 1st, 2023 be as far back as we look for the next 5 years after that. After July 2028, Then, of course, the 5-year look back period just rolls on as a period day by day. But prior to that, it does not penalize anyone for any work done during the previous 2 years. And I believe that really allows projects to be completed, whether planned or in process, and should make the transition much smoother and easier for all. We also contacted both DEEP and FEMA to get as simple an answer as we could for what is included in the analysis of substantial improvement. And the answer, the simplest answer, is any project requiring a building permit is to be included. Now, the senior emergency management specialist we interfaced with at FEMA said the real answer is any project, because it requires a floodplain analysis of that particular project, and therefore it's included. But the fact of the matter is, without a building permit, nobody really tracks these things. And both FEMA and DEEP recognize that it's too difficult to track. So we're just letting people know, even though that isn't exactly what is proper. We're letting everybody know it's any project requiring a building permit will be included in the substantial improvement analysis. We also got some feedback on appraisal versus assessment, and both our current floodplain ordinance and the proposed floodplain ordinance use the appraised value of the dwelling based on the most recent grand list. This is the recommendation that FEMA has made. A majority of the Connecticut municipalities use it. And a letter we just got last night from DEEP indicates that, you know, if there's a substantially incorrect appraisal and someone wants to go to the trouble of having a professional appraisal of their property, and it turns out to be substantially different than what the town has, that would be a good use for the variance procedure that we have in place. And that would allow these things to be reviewed. But we think that to keep the playing field level, we should continue to use the grand list value, but be open to hearing a variance if there's an issue that needs to be brought up based on some abnormality. And the last thing we went over was historic structures. Our current floodplain ordinance does not have this. The modified ordinance that we're proposing has language which allows a locally adopted historic district without, to actually include historic structures as needed. That would exempt that historic structure, from having to comply with the FEMA regulations regarding specifically BFE elevation. So that's in our proposed document and should handle the needs of people that have historic structures. Hank, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Woody. So we've submitted these letters to the Board of Selectmen. I believe you all have received them, whether you've read them or not. This is sort of real-time activity. We just sent them yesterday, I think, because we just finished them or confirmed. Yes, this is the final. This is our final look at the recommendations and what we think is the right answer for the town and for what we've been discussing. So we don't have anything more as far as presentations go. Happy to hear any questions you might have or whatever the next step is.
Well, I guess just a couple of thoughts, and then I'll pass it over to my fellow selectmen to ask questions of the committee. First of all, thank you for going back and relooking at this as a committee. I think that was fantastic to listen to the public and transform some of your thinking. I'd be interested, I don't know if it's Woody or maybe even Joe McDougall, just to reiterate to the public, what is actually required by the state? What do we, from a compliance standpoint, what do we have to do? What is our minimum that we have to do?
Relative to
The floodplain ordinance.
to the floodplain ordinance in total.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the look back that we're putting in place. I mean, is the state giving us recommendations here?
Woody, we heard from Diane.
Should I handle it or you, Joe?
No, go ahead, Woody.
With regard specifically to the look back period, the state, as you could see from the model ordinance, put in 10 years, but made it very clear that it can be whatever the community wants from 1 year on. The actual law, Scott, is that there is no federal requirement for a look back period. Without a look back period, the whole determination becomes very difficult to administer. And FEMA's minimum that they feel is manageable from an administrative perspective is 1 year, but it's not codified. As we've mentioned before, all 4 surrounding towns have a 5-year look back. 1 year, there's no community with less than 1 year of a look back at all. There's actually one community with a life of structure look back. So it ranges. The average right now is 5 years. And I would say that between 3 and 10 is the beginning and ending of your bell curve. And 5 would sit pretty smack in the middle. I think Joe might be better suited to make any further comments on that.
Oh, I don't know if I'm better suited, but first, Hank, Woody, Walter, Graham, it's great to see you guys at this part. I mean, this is fantastic and moving this along. I think actually Diane Yikovic in her letter, gave you the one sentence you need. She goes, many shoreline communities currently have a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year, 10-year standard in order to bring it. So, I think as I understand where you guys are, and Graham, it was good to talk to you earlier. The important thing is to get your base flood elevation up, right? That's one of the most significant things. That's what keeps your town safe. That's where the town is going. Public Act 1882 put the entire state on the standard. And the decision as to how your look back and ordinance goes is kind of, I think, to the conversation you were just having in other context, a bit of a political decision for the residents, trying to find what's reasonable. You can't administer a program without it. And then the question is then how do you best put it in place so that you get ultimately compliance for sea level rise, which is, concerning and dangerous and slower moving. So how do you do something now so that you don't make your problem worse immediately? And how do you ease into it so that it's fair for the current residents? And the proposal that I think you guys advanced and changed sounds very reasonable to sort of thread that needle. I don't know that there's guidance from FEMA or from DEEP or anyone else aside from your committee, to bring you there.
Scott, do I get to ask a question now?
Of course you do. Well, I guess one other point, Al, before you do that, just I guess one important just procedural thing. And Hank, you guys have not met yet as a official committee to vote on this new recommendation at this point. You have a meeting later in the week. Is that right?
Yeah,
I want to make sure that's clear to people.
That's correct. We have not voted on it as a committee. This has been the sub-working group of the committee.
Okay.
That's been the representatives that have been coming to the meetings and doing a lot of the work on the recommendations. But no, as far as the actual Coastal Resiliency Commission voting to recommend this and approve it, no, we have not done that yet. There's a substantial number of people that all the people that are involved here are all part of that commission. So we're going to have a conversation with the remaining members and make sure they're also on board and if they have concerns, talk through those as we already have. And then when we get to a place, we will actually do a vote.
Looks like Walter wants to say something.
Walter.
You're on mute, Walter.
Yeah, just on that last point as to what we voted on. I think, Hank, we did vote on the first ordinance. We just haven't voted on these 2 changes. Is that correct? I
think we may have voted on them, but I think that
Yeah,
is,
that's fine.
we've moved on from it, I guess.
Yeah, we actually presented this to the Board of Selectmen in September, and then again in February, and then again in March. So way back, it's hard to remember that far back because COVID's been in the way. We did vote on this, but I think it's fair to say we should take this back because we've made some suggested changes on that, on the look back, for instance. So that would be a new provision, and naturally we could give a chance for any member on this commission to say, you know what, what we thought about last year we don't like, we should make some other changes. So a discussion with the commission makes sense, but the real changes are the ones that were just described by Woody.
Yeah, and I know also on our last public hearing, I think, or last selectman meeting, Peggy also alluded to, being receptive to holding another public hearing as well once that is formally recommended to the Board of Selectmen. So once you vote, I think we would expect then to calendar another public hearing to hear how the public is thinking about this. So anyways, Al, I know you had a question, so I'll steer it to you.
I'm going to address this question to our semi-academic here, Mr. McDougall. We heard from the public the most basic of questions, which was, why do we need a floodplain ordinance? So I'm going to ask Joe, what are the philosophical and regulatory foundations as to why we have a floodplain ordinance? What if we did nothing as a town?
Well, so there are a couple of things, and I think members of the committee can probably chime in on this as well, because you've been talking about it, I'm sure, a lot. I mean, the first is one of the most important misconceptions, I think, in this area is the FEMA line. You know, a lot of times you hear about the FEMA line, the National Flood Insurance line, and beneath that line, you need to pay attention to things, as if FEMA modeled out exactly where the exposed areas are in the town of Madison. And depending on where you are on this regulatory line, you should change your behavior. One of the realities is that a lot of that national analysis is extremely coarse. In one of the models, Connecticut represents 2 pixels of data point for the whole coastline. So that's why the legislature had Circa, and I know we presented to you guys, go through, and the marine science people, to create a more detailed view. And what does that tell you? That tells you that the combination of sort of mainline center thinking on sea level rise, what's, in the 80 to 90% likelihood of at least going to be the thing we should plan for, tells us you're going to get 50 centimeters by 2050. That doesn't mean properties go underwater. The Long Island Sound shaped like a bowl, but it does mean that the 100-year storm, the 1% storm, shows up in our area every 12 years. But the real scary thing is the 10-year storm, the worst storm you can think of in every 10 years, is now coming pretty much every year. And for coastal communities, that's the thing none of us built up for. In some respects, that's the more dangerous thing, where homes start to erode, you get damage out of scale from what you expect. And that's why base flood elevation, we did an analysis of coastal towns. We found that from New Haven through Mystic, towns had been raising their base flood elevation without knowing any of this, just on their own, based on real world experience. So increasing your base flood elevation up to BFE +2 is incredibly important. It's what keeps property safe. You do nothing. As properties continue to grade, as they need work that people can't afford, you end up having them purchased, the neighborhoods turn over, you end up gentrifying a lot of the coast at an even faster rate, or you have properties that no longer can keep their value and survive, and you have some properties that will turn into becoming dangerous. And this, I think, Dave, maybe you can even back me up, was probably the discussions you get from people. I've received calls, by the way, which I'm pretty remote from this, so if I've got them, I'm sure you're getting more of them, where people have called me, typically legal academics who know I'm in town, asking, if we're experiencing problems. I'm sure the realtors get this question too. So I think to the extent that your board and commission take leadership on this, you're going to need to, because people will continue to ask the question. So Al, I don't know if that was a philosophical enough question, but at least that's a policy reason why I think you really did a good thing trying to put this commission together, and you should certainly do something, rapidly.
Some of our residents asked, what if we did nothing at this point? And I think we owe the public a further understanding of why we as a town government feel a need to take action here.
Well, how do you straight face it to a new resident? Someone's coming in now and there's a risk to the area. You know it. The state's adopted resolutions for it. There's science behind it. And your answer is to say, you know what? You're on your own. Good luck with that. We know there's a 2-foot problem. How do you do that? You don't. You need to communicate that these are areas, there's something to do. It is an obligation built within that property, whether you recognize it or not. And being to say the standard is BFE +2, as opposed to BFE +1, which you've already done, then that's just reality for what's going on. It's not a secret, by the way. Anybody with a Google search can spot it throughout the coast to Connecticut. This exists everywhere.
Woody, I know you have a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to direct this at you, Al, and the group. Our floodplain ordinance currently does not take into account any of the state building code modifications that were made in 2018. And so it's an obsolete document that gives people who read it the wrong information. Our floodplain ordinance currently talks about BFE. It doesn't talk about BFE +1, although the town of Madison has been required to implement that change ever since October 1st, 2018. So why are we changing our floodplain ordinance? Well, we're actually 2 years late in changing it because it doesn't even cope with the changes made October 1st, 2018. So we have to rewrite vast sections of it just to comply with code that's been in existence for 2 years. We're going a little above that because in the past 2 years, so much evidence has come out that common sense says we had better listen to that scientific evidence. And instead of BFE +1, which is currently law, although it's not reflected in our ordinance, we would go to BFE +2 for the most endangered structures. I think Joe would prefer us to do BFE +2 everywhere. You can nod. And in an effort to try to gradually go into that, we've gone to BFE +2 only for VE zones and coastal AE zones, which is a very minimal amount of the dwellings. So that's why we're updating our floodplain ordinance out.
And Dave, maybe I'll throw this question to you, and I'm not sure if you know the answer, and maybe it's something we need to further understand, but I know Public Works may have a point of view on this related to the floodplain administration. Is there additional feedback that we still need to gather? Do we have it? Do we feel like we're...
No, I think you guys are still expected to receive some input from both the building official and the town engineer, who's the floodplain administrator. I think they were kind of observing the public hearing process and kind of seeing what the public had to say, and then they were going to weigh in as well. I think you should expect some feedback from them.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
I have a question on the getting back to the language of the ordinance, and I didn't have an opportunity to read what was most recently circulated, but are you changing the definition of substantial improvements then? Woody, you mentioned any project requiring a permit. So is that changing? Is the scope of that changing as far as what's considered a substantial improvement?
No, it's just the simplification of what our residents can expect will be included in that analysis. If a project is minor enough not to require a building permit, we're really not cognizant of the project. And although I think FEMA would prefer us to find a method of including any project, it simply isn't practicable.
Can I ask a totally novice question here, but does doing a roof or doing siding on your house, does that require a building permit?
Generally, yes. Doing a repair on your siding or a repair on your roof does not. Replacing your siding or replacing the majority of your roof does. Those are processes that need to be inspected by the building official for compliance, and therefore does require a building permit.
So does our ordinance, the scope of our definition, is it broader than what is required?
No, it is exactly what's required and no more than that. We just wanted to provide our residents with a clarification of what that really means. It's a lot of gobbledygook, and what does it really mean? And the answer is, if you have to go to town hall and take out a building permit, it's included. And if you don't, then it's not, because we really have no simple method to do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I think it's those questions that continue to confuse me, because we could, so I recognize that the building permit is the trigger for measurement, but I don't believe that an assessment would change the value of the structure because of that. So on the one hand, there's an investment in the property that's counted towards the value of the property, but on the other hand, there is no real increase in value to the property. And I'm not sure, in my novice reading of this document, which, thank you, Joe, it's very technical, is how do we reconcile that? And so I have an idea about this. We've had a lot of hypothetical concerns, right? So concerns in theory about the impact to structures and homeowners, but could we choose a couple of the sort of likely types of work that would be done on a house that would count and or would be eligible for some sort of appeals process for special consideration, right? So for instance, you know, that roof that needs to be replaced because it's normal wear and tear on the roof or the siding, versus turning a 1-bedroom house into a 4-bedroom house, or turning, you know, a 1-bathroom house into a 2 or 3-bathroom house, right? So there's clearly a spectrum of improvement that that needs to be considered, and I think it would help me get grounded in the real world impact. You know, that change to a historical structure would be eligible for consideration because of this other path, this normal wear and tear improvement would be available for consideration because of yet a different path for appeals. And so a handful of examples of how a structure might move through the process and be impacted financially, I think would be very, very helpful to us as we consider this.
A simple answer, Bruce, is that FEMA would like to see more structures brought into compliance, not delayed any longer than is reasonable based on people investing in their homes. It's a terrible shame to see people invest in their homes without bringing them into compliance and then have a storm damage that or destroy that home. That money is lost.
So I agree with you 100%. So that is the second point that I want to bring up, and that is, what is the private overlay? There's a private regulatory environment in the form of insurance that has its own expectations. Where does that regulatory overlay impact this? Joe is raising his hand.
Go ahead, Joe.
I always like to say every environmental discussion ends in a conversation about insurance with no one on the room that knows anything about insurance. So doing my best to channel one of my insurance colleagues I work with, I think a fair way, and actually a key insight of this I got from Dave Anderson about a year or two ago. So there's the federal flood insurance program. There is active legislation to start increasing what we pay for federal flood insurance by home value. That's happened before. There was a thing called Briggert Water some years ago that was so controversial it disappeared. But the smart money says that even if we don't see it this year, we'll see it soon. So our residents are going to be exposed to underlying insurance rising sometime in our future, we believe. The second part of it is there is private insurance above that. But I think one of the real concerns is that if you're getting a mortgage, many of your bank is going to require flood insurance, which is going to trigger your base flood elevation anyway, increasing. One of the real concerns, though, is for those people that are coming in and are buying without mortgages and are sort of taking the risk within it, that I understand for some time we had quite many of. those people are fully exposed because there's a very serious gap in a lot of homeowners insurance to storm damage. And then if they're knocked down, you don't want to run the risk of stranded and abandoned properties because they're not compliant with flood insurance. So it's a real risk that on the one hand affects people who are highly vulnerable, right? If they're not doing this now, they buy into a home and that increase in flood insurance is a big expense for them in their household income, but also affects people at other parts of the economic spectrum because they're taking a big risk. They might not understand the size of it. So that you can't really rely, I guess the big message, you can't rely on insurance to be the factor to tell you when to elevate. The market's too messy.
And I wasn't trying to.
No, sorry. I must say that's what you're saying, Bruce.
I was really just wondering, is the private insurance industry already more restrictive than what we're proposing? In other words, since they're the ones who are financially on the hook for a property they insure, are they holding the homeowner to a higher standard than what we're discussing?
You've got federal displacement of insurance policy, where you have the federal flood insurance program that exists for a lot of reasons that aren't so great about protecting people. It's an economic component. It is the second largest underfunded component in the entire federal budget after healthcare. Just so you understand the scope of why the federal flood insurance isn't an attractive policy measure.
Plus, the NFIP maximum is 250,000, and that's the maximum you can purchase. And most high-end insurance companies are bailing from covering VE and coastal AE zones. They do not want to do that. I was notified that our insurance company grandfathered us for the time being, but I suspect within a few years, you won't be able to get private insurance at a reasonable rate in coastal AE and VE zones. And if the NFIP starts to go up to market value, what the actuarial numbers are, you're going to see $500 to $1,000 annual policies go to 5,000 to 10,000 annual policies. It'll take some time because there's currently an 18% limit on the increase that can be levied on NFIP policies, and that could change. But right now it's 18% a year. But if 18% a year, if you just do the math, it doesn't take long for those policies to be unaffordable by almost everyone. We really have to get these buildings elevated. And we really have to count, Bruce, as unpleasant as it may be, anything that requires a building permit on the dwelling is going to be counted. That doesn't mean that there might not be a situation where we just absolutely positively have to grant a variance because it makes sense. Of course, that's what the process is for. But in general, this is really the way we have to go if you want us to be resilient. Joe, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. And one other sort of thing to tie into Al's question of a few minutes ago, which was why do you have to do this? I know it's budget season, so none of you are actually thinking about tax rates or expenditures, right? Or that's what you talk about all the time. The town is still fed largely by the properties. There's a disproportionate level of contribution to the former Board of Finance chair from the coast making our way upward. To the extent we don't safeguard the properties down there by making sure the policies keep that area where it is, it then starts shifting the tax burden away from the coast. So you'll start to see if those property, you then start seeing this property tax burden spreading throughout the town. It can be a pretty big change to us. So the more we do to keep the area resilient and safe, the more stable a lot of our government is. It's not just the planning and zoning issues.
Any last questions from the board here?
Just a quick one, Joe. You mentioned this very, very quickly, but you talked about the gentrification of the coastal areas, and of course that's a concern. Do you have any suggestions as we consider this on ways to mitigate that? In other words, not make this so expensive that the only solution for a homeowner is to sell.
Yeah, and it's the hardest part. I mean, first of all, acknowledging what the risk and what it takes to be resilient matters, right? Then people can plan for it. Because unexpected, I mean, part of the thing we see in this whole area was true with Irene and Sandy. Areas like Cozy Beach, and some of the other communities don't have the resources to respond to it, because unexpected disruptions are much worse for people who are living tighter to their budget. So, I mean, that's the very first thing. One of the other things is hopefully keep an eye out for the federal programs that are coming in. We know that after Irene and Sandy, there was an awful lot of money that came through, both for resiliency. The state of Connecticut won the National Disaster Resiliency Competition for $60 million approximately. That a lot of that went to berms in Bridgeport to protect areas. Watch the federal programs. The other thing is identify where your risks are, because then you know what to apply to grants for. And that's that's something that's important, I think, really uniquely run by your board now, in anticipation of what programs could be coming up for the next couple of years. But ultimately supporting the standards like this, so each home, as it gets constructed, as it gets redone, as it gets built, as people come in, is as resilient as it can be within reason.
Great. Any last thoughts?
Oh, we appreciate your time.
If I could maybe just make one
or bring us home, Dave.
Quick comments. Just to circle back with the discussion we had earlier about the Plan of Conservation and Development.
Yeah.
I'm just, wanted to share a page out of the Plan of Conservation and Development about, preparing for sea changes, which includes sea level rise and increased frequency of coastal storms. And the bottom of this page shows, seek to prevent or minimize losses in vulnerable areas. So the Planning and Zoning Commission back in December 2019, actually in response to this Plan of Conservation and Development, made a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen. And that recommendation was to increase above BFE and to introduce a look back period to our floodplain ordinance. So this recommendation, which is now being carried forward by the Coastal Resiliency Commission, was initially formulated by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And so that recommendation, actually myself and Ron Clark came to a Board of Selectmen meeting, resulted in us inviting Joe McDougald and Circa to give a presentation, which he, again, probably reiterated some of that today about the importance of these things. And then that presentation actually is what resulted in the formation of the Coastal Resiliency Commission. And so, and then these folks have been spending a lot of time, not just parroting the Planning and Zoning Commission, because honestly, this Coastal Resiliency Commission has put in a lot more work and a lot more thought into this specific issue than the Planning and Zoning Commission had time to do. So this has been discussed in earnest since December 2019. So I just wanted to provide you that just as a little bit of context. That it's not just these gentlemen from the Coastal Resiliency Commission, over the past couple months. This has been an ongoing conversation for the town for quite some time. So I think what I'd like to try to achieve today is an understanding from the Board of Selectmen. I know we'd like to have, and I agree with, an additional public information meeting. But kind of what other information do you think would be helpful to the Board of Selectmen to enable some type of future action on this, so that we were able to assist you effectively?
Well, I think you talked about it earlier, but maybe some input, obviously, from the floodplain administrator via Public Works. I think that's certainly one area. I don't know if we need to get our town council to weigh in on this relative to what is being proposed, but I think that would be advantageous. Obviously, the public hearing you mentioned, and then setting it up for a vote for the Board of Selectmen. So I'm not sure how many meetings from now that might be, but I see that as sort of our next steps. Let's get that public hearing scheduled. So any other thoughts from Selectmen as we close this topic out?
No, I mean, other than
again, thank you very much, by the way, to the committee. You guys have been doing yeoman's work. I know this has been a lot, and we appreciate you rethinking things as well.
Dave, I'll just restate my request that it would be helpful if we could have some real examples of what would happen in a given circumstance. It helps give some life to the regulations that's a little bit hard to tease out. And I just want to echo Scott's comment. I mean, you guys have taken an incredibly complicated topic on and devoted a lot of time to it and given us great input. It's a lot to consider. It has a real impact in town, and I can't think of a better case of a group coming back to us with exactly what we asked for. We asked for your best practice recommendation, and I'm comfortable that you've given us that thoughtful product.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. We'll close this
Thank you
topic
very
out
much.
now. Yeah, appreciate your time. And I will turn the meeting back over to our first selectwoman, Peggy Lyons.
Thank you. All right, the next item on the agenda is, can I get a motion to approve the appointment of Will Braun to the Board of Assessment Appeals for a term to expire November 1st, 2023?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Just want to say thank you for stepping up. I know that's a tough board to sit on, and I appreciate your service to the town. All in favor of the appointment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, next is, can I get a motion to accept the resignation of Eileen Banish from the Historic District Commission?
So moved with gratitude.
Second.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Eileen, for your service, and hopefully you're enjoying your new resettlement in South Carolina. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, great. All right, item number 14. Lauren, were there any abatements or refunds?
Yeah, I'll move $51,125.19.
Okay.
A lot this time.
It is a lot.
Yeah. A second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Okay. All right, last item is citizens' comments.
We have a few.
Okay.
They held with us.
Dee Dee Stone is first.
Good morning. My name is Dee Dee Stone. My husband and I own a historic cottage at 99 Middle Beach Road. I am acutely aware of the FEMA guidelines, having been restoring our cottage over the last 3 years and following all the guidelines for the look back period. And I appreciate the Coastal Resiliency's work on trying to come up with a proposal that they feel will be appeasing to the residents. I would like to bring up the fact that as we go forward with public hearings, when I first heard about the Coastal Resiliency Commission's proposed amendments to the floodplain ordinance was when I attended a Board of Selectmen meeting on February 22nd. I made an effort at that point to get the actual document that they had presented to the Board of Selectmen so that I could see what the proposals were, because it wasn't clear to me from the short presentation that they made what was included. I then made it a point to reach out to neighbors, especially older neighbors who do not live in town during the off season, to let them know what was going on. And I think that that has been a general flaw in this process, in that there are, I would say, easily 60 to 70% of the residents who own property, especially along Middle Beach West and Tuxas Road, who are not in town, do not have access to the source, don't peruse the Board of Selectmen agenda every single day on the website, and wouldn't have known otherwise. So I made it a point to reach out to them. And I do believe that Emil's suggestion that this be done going forward is very valid. I think that we, as a town, have an obligation to residents that are directly affected by proposals such as these to give them information so that they can choose whether or not to participate, make comment, or write a letter to the Board of Selectmen expressing their views. And I think if 60 to 70% of these people don't even know about something going on, it's really affecting their personal property rights in a very negative way, aside from any proposals. So I would like to strongly encourage, whether it's the CRC or the Board of Selectmen, to reach out to the 160 plus affected individuals in advance of any future public hearing or vote that's going to be held on something, so that these homeowners who are not residents here and usually not even in the state in the off season are aware of the potential changes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Another public comment.
Emil Geisenheimer is next.
Hi. Well, that was an enlightening discussion. I want to make a point that you guys ought to be aware of. It was misstated that the building permit. Let me just read from the town website when a building permit is required. The building permits are required for all construction in Madison, except for replacement of small sections of non-critical existing structures by homeowners. For example, replacing a window sash would not require a permit, while replacing an entire window would. So if they make the what's a substantial improvement, all things requiring a building permit, it's virtually everything. You cannot make any, I have work done in my house all the time, and I can tell you, I've got a stack of building permits that would fill a file cabinet. So just be aware of that. It's not appropriate to use building permits as a measure of what is a substantial improvement. Secondly, the elevating homes to BFE plus 2 feet may be appropriate if it's been determined that the home has to be elevated in the first place. I think it would be inappropriate for that to be a trigger that it's elevated, so that a compliant home before the regulation is passed becomes non-compliant after it's passed would be an inappropriate action for the board to take. I completely disagree with Mr. McDougall, and I think if you spent time talking with the real estate community, you would learn that he's totally wrong about the effect on the tax base. This regulation, if implemented as recommended, will immediately diminish the value of my home and every other home on Middle Beach Road. I guarantee it. Any buyer looking at it with the burden that's contained in this regulation will see it as reducing the value. For some reason, people are under the impression that you can elevate a home for low cost. That's just not true. I elevated mine in 1995. It was costly then, but it's extremely costly now. A home of my size would cost $800,000 to elevate. Very few people are going to undertake that because of this regulation. They likely sell and move somewhere else. And then they're going to sell at a reduced price, and you're going to have less revenue. And Mr. McDougall's concern about the tax base moving north he's right. It'll happen the moment you approve this. So I really urge you to consider that. Lastly, as someone who grew up in New Orleans, has lived through many hurricanes, I lived through Irene here, I lived through Gloria here, I lived through Sandy here. I can tell you that the Coastal Resilience Committee has failed to even look at the real problem. The real problem is not the level of the sea. It's not the sea surge. It's the waves. If I urge the selectmen to get a look at photographs of during Irene, and you will see waves that are thrown up to over homes, the tops of 35-foot tall structures. Being battered by those waves causes the majority of the damage, not the water encroaching on the first floor. If you really want to do resilience, do what they do in Europe, and they build water breaks, not to stop the water completely, but to break up the waves before they hit the shoreline. That's something that, as someone who spent my early career in civil engineering and water management, I can tell you the hydraulic pressure is what destroys homes, not the sea level itself. If you want an example, those of you may remember how Middle Beach Road was itself destroyed by Hurricane Irene. That wasn't because of the sea level. That was because of hydraulic pressure getting under the road and lifting it. It lifted whole sections of Middle Beach Road and cast them in people's yards. That's not going to be corrected by raising a house. Raising a house, even to BFE +2, when it's hit by those waves, is still going to be destroyed, heavily damaged. So if the commission really did their homework and talked to some engineers instead of looking simply at regulations, they would find that the real problem is hydraulic destruction of homes. That's the waves. And to break up the waves before they get to the shoreline is a way to really address this problem. So I'd urge you to do that. Look at photographs of Irene and look at the waves crashing over houses and through them. That's where the damage was caused, almost in every case. Thank you for your consideration.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think we have more comment.
That's everyone who had their hand raised.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, for a discussion on a lot of different topics. And we appreciate the public hanging in there for the different segments that their interest was piqued. And there'll be more discussion on all of these, obviously, at future Board of Selectmen meetings. I just want to give one shout out. We talk about communication. I would encourage everybody, whether you're a Madison resident or Madison property owner, is to sign up for Madison Alerts, which is on the website. And we're going to try to be using that more about pushing out to the community about what topics are being talked about. And so we want to encourage people to sign up for those alerts. You can get it by email, by text, by phone call. So we're trying to put up a policy about what we do push out, because the other thing we don't want to do is annoy people with too many alerts on things that they don't care about. So so I just encourage for you to tell your friends and family and neighbors to sign up for that system. And we're going to try to use that and leverage that more in the future so that the public is aware of a lot of the different things that the board is going to be discussing. So with that, I guess, can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
All right. All in favor, say aye. Okay. Thank you, guys. All right. Have a good day, everybody.